The board woke up with a sound it was not supposed to be able to make. Nessa Corland had been watching that board for 19 days, and for 19 days it had shown her the same thing. A flat gray shelf of noise where the planet should have been, and under the noise nothing. No pings, no carrier, no crew. She had learned the exact shape of that nothing the way a person learns the ceiling over a sickbed. So when a single thread of signal climbed up out of the gray at 4:17 ship time, thin as a hair and wrong in every way a signal could be wrong, she did not believe it. She reached over and knocked the heel of her hand against the side of the console, the way her father used to smack the side of a radio that had started lying to him. The thread did not go away, it got stronger. "Talk to me," she said to no one, because the graveyard shift on a recovery cutter is one tech and a lot of empty chairs. She dropped both hands to the panel and started stripping the return down, layer by layer, the way you peel frost off a windshield when you are in too much of a hurry to wait for the cabin to warm. Carrier first. Then the halo interference, the charged dust shell that wrapped the death world like a second atmosphere and ate everything that tried to cross it in either direction. Then the drift, then the Doppler, then the compression wrapper that somebody had folded around the payload by hand, badly, in a hurry, on equipment that had no business folding anything. It was a picture. That stopped her cold, both hands flat on the panel. Nobody sent a picture. A picture was the single most wasteful thing you could push through a halo like this one. 1,000 times the load of a voice line, 10,000 times a text burst. You sent a picture through the void only if a picture was the one thing you had, and words were a thing you had lost the ability to send. It came in the way old pictures used to come in over bad lines, top to bottom, one strip of the world at a time. The first strip was white. She thought at first that it was a failure, a blown-out frame, sensor death. Then the second strip resolved and it was still white, and the third, and she understood that the white was the ground, a flat, blazing, salt-pale plain under a sun so hard it left no shadows worth the name. The death world. The place, the Concord's own charts marked with a symbol that meant do not, in 4 languages, and left otherwise blank. The fourth strip brought in a shape. The fifth strip brought in more of it, and by the 6th she had stopped breathing on purpose because her breath was fogging the panel and she needed to see. The shape was an animal. It was enormous. It lay along the white ground the way a fallen wall lies, low and long and certain, a pale slab of muscle and hide the color of old bone, ribbed with plating along the spine, one forelimb thrown forward and ending in a spread of claws each as long as her forearm. Its head was turned back over that limb. Its eye was open. The eye was the only dark thing in the entire frame, and it was looking straight up the line of the transmission, straight out of the picture, straight at her, calm as a closed door. The 7th strip and the 8th brought in the boy. He was asleep against its side. He was tucked into the curve where the great limb met the body, one arm flung across the animal's foreleg, the way a child sleeps across a dog on a hot afternoon, cheek down on the hide, mouth a little open. He wore the gray underlayer of a survey suit, filthy, the collar torn. His hair had grown out. There was a smear of something dark down one side of his face that had dried and cracked. He was thin in a way that made her stomach turn over. And he was, unmistakably, completely, defenselessly asleep. Asleep on the flank of the largest predator anyone in the Concorde had ever gotten a clean image of, on the surface of a world that had killed everything that had ever tried to stand on it. Under the picture, folded into the last few bits of the payload where a signature block would go, there were 4 characters, not a name, a hull number, M- then 3 digits. Nessa knew the number. Everyone on the cutter knew the number. It was painted on the manifest they had all been staring at for 19 days. It belonged to a survey tender called the Marigold, and to the 12 people who had ridden her down into the void and had not, by every rule the Concorde kept, come back up. She hit the all-hands. By the time Overseer Taran reached the signals deck, the picture was up on the big display, 6 feet of it, and every waking soul aboard the recovery cutter ledger was crowded in under it, and not one of them was saying a word. Taran did not like the silence. Silence, in the overseer's long experience, was a thing that happened just before a great deal of expensive noise. He came in through the hatch with the particular tall, folding motion of his kind, the viharn, whose 4 legs and 2 arms had been shaped by 10,000 years of a world where you kept low doorways and long memories. He was old for his caste. He had closed 19 recovery files in his career, and had learned to close the 20th before it opened, because a file you closed early was a file that never cost you anyone. He had come up to this deck fully intending to close this one. He looked at the picture for a long time. "Explain it," he said. Nessa was the one who had to. She stood at the base of the display with a stylus she was not using and told him, in the flat clip delivery she saved for people who outranked her, what the board had done at 417. The thread. The halo eye, a thinning in the dust shell that came around, the charts said, roughly once a local day, a window of a few minutes when the void stopped being a perfect wall and became only a very good one. The compression wrapper, folded by hand. The hull number. She did not editorialize. She had learned not to. She laid it out like a road, one stone after another, and let him walk down it himself and arrive, on his own feet, at the boy asleep on the monster. "It is a still image," Taran said when she had finished. "Yes, Overseer." He sent a still image. The Overseer's mouthparts worked, a small dry motion that on a viharn stood in for a man rubbing his jaw, through the halo, at the cost of everything else he might have said. "Yes, Overseer." "Why?" The room had a lot of answers to that, and every one of them was a guess, so nobody offered one. Nessa did, because someone had to, and because she had been sitting alone with the picture for 20 minutes and had already had the thought and could not put it back down. "Because a picture is the one thing you can't argue with," she said. "A voice line, we'd have said it was a bounce, a degraded loop, a ghost off the old beacon. We'd have written it off in an hour, and he knows that because he's crew and crew knows how we think. So he didn't send words. He sent proof. He sent us the one image nobody up here could explain away and nobody up here could ignore." She looked up at the 6 feet of white and bone and the sleeping boy. "He sent us a photograph of himself being alive, because he knew we'd already decided he wasn't." Taran was quiet. "We had," he said finally, "decided he wasn't." "Yes, Overseer." "All 12. "Yes, Overseer." The Overseer moved closer to the display, up under it, his long head tilted back, and studied the animal the way a man studies a bridge he is being asked to drive a heavy load across. The Conquered had a designation for the death world, Kier 9, and a longer designation buried in the Hazard Annex that ranked its surface environment above every colonized world in the sector, and above most of the uncolonized ones. The Annex did not have a designation for the animal, because the Annex had never gotten a clean look at one. 3 expeditions had gone to Kier 9 in 40 years, a Conquered survey team, a private salvage consortium, and 22 years ago, a mixed scientific mission that had been the pride of 2 governments. Between them they had sent 140 personnel to the surface. Between them they had transmitted, back up through the halo, exactly nothing, no distress, no last words, no data, no picture. They went into the void, and the void closed over them without a ripple. And after the 3rd one, the Conquered had stopped trying and started using the place as the thing you pointed to when you wanted to explain to a young officer what a death world actually meant. The marigold had not been sent. That was the part that made Taran's caste-deep tidiness itch. The marigold had been a human survey tender, small, 12 hands, running a contract chart of the outer belt, and she had gone into the void off her own manifest, chasing a beacon, an automated distress echo, 40 years stale from the very first expedition, that had started pinging again for reasons no one had ever established. The humans had a word for what the marigold had done. Taran had heard the human liaison use it, back when there had still been a liaison and not just a widow's list. They had gone to see if anyone was still down there. No one survives Kier 9, Taran said. He was not arguing. He was reading the annex aloud from memory, the way an old man recites a prayer he no longer fully believes but is not willing to be the one to stop saying. 140 personnel, 3 expeditions, a closure rate of 100%. That number is the reason this cutter exists, to log the loss, secure the volume, and post the warning. That is the whole of our writ here. We are not equipped for descent. We were not sent to descend. We were sent to close the file. He's asleep, Overseer, Nessa said quietly. I see that he is asleep. On top of the thing that killed everybody else. She stepped up beside him, small under the display, her chin tipped back like his. Every expedition, 40 years, 140 people, and not one of them ever sent so much as a scream up through that halo. And a 19-year-old cargo raiding with a busted suit rig and no team and no support has been down there 3 weeks, and he figured out the halo eye, and he built a compressor by hand, and he timed a burst to the window, and the picture he chose to spend all of that on is a picture of himself taking a nap. She let it sit. That's not a man who's dying, sir. That's a man who's bored. That's a man telling us to hurry up. Somewhere at the back of the room, one of the humans made a sound that was half a laugh and half something with no name, and put a hand over the sound to stop it. Taran did not laugh. The Vharn did not, as a species, have the equipment for it, and Taran personally had spent a career making sure he would not have wanted it. But he found that he had, without deciding to, moved from certainty to its opposite, and he did not enjoy the trip. Certainty was the Overseer's whole method. He closed files early because early was where the certainty lived. Everything after early was cost. He is 1, Taran said. The manifest is 12. The room's warmth went out of it. Nessa felt it go. 1 transmission, the Overseer went on, and his voice did not rise because a Vharn's voice never rose. It only got flatter, and flat was worse. 1 image. It shows 1. There is no evidence in that frame of the other 11, and there is a great deal of evidence in 40 years of this file of what Kier 9 does to 11. I will not stand under a picture of a sleeping child and tell this crew we are about to recover a survey tender's complement of 12, because I have closed 19 files, tech, and the cruelest one I ever closed was the one where I let a room believe a number the evidence did not support. The evidence supports 1, possibly 1. For the length of 1 image, captured we do not know how long ago, of a world where the difference between alive and not is measured in minutes. Nessa held his eye. She was young enough that she had not yet learned when to stop, and old enough already to know that this was one of the times, and she did not stop. Then we go get the 1, she said. Taran looked at her. We are not equipped for descent, he said again, but slower this time, the way a man reads a rule he is preparing to break to himself. We have a landing tender. We have 4 exorigs. We have the HFY window on the charts, and now we've got a real one, time-stamped, because he just shot a burst through it and told us exactly when it opens. She was ticking them off. She had, he realized, been building this argument in the 20 minutes she'd had the deck to herself, and she had built it well, and that irritated him and impressed him in the exact proportions that told him she was probably right. We know the terrain now, flat, hardpan, no cover, but flat means a tender can put down. We know where he is near enough from the burst origin. And we know he's alive as of 1 HFY ago, which is more than any recovery team in the history of this file has ever been able to say about anybody. And the animal, Taran said. That was the thing. That was the thing nobody in the room had said out loud, and the Overseer had said it, because it was his job to say the thing. Everyone looked back up at the picture, at the pale slab of it, at the 1 dark eye open, aimed up the dead transmission at all of them, calm as a closed door. It's asleep too, Nessa said. It is looking at the camera. It's looking at him, she said. He set the frame. Look at it, look how he's got it composed. He propped his slate on something and set a timer and lay down in the shot on purpose, because he wanted the picture to say a specific thing, and the thing he wanted it to say was, "I'm fine." And the reason a picture of a boy asleep on the apex predator of a death world reads as "I'm fine," she stopped, because she was about to say something she had not fully thought through and was only now hearing herself think, is because it isn't guarding him. It isn't holding him. There's no cage in that frame, overseer. There's no wound on the boy that a thing that size would have left. It's just lying there. He crawled up against the single most dangerous animal on the single most dangerous world the Conquered has ever charted, and he fell asleep on it, and it let him, and then he took a picture to prove it. That's the message. The animal is the message. He's telling us the one thing down there that everybody's been afraid of for 40 years decided it liked him. The overseer stood under the picture for a long moment. That, Taran said, is a great deal to read into a nap. It's a great deal to spend a whole halo burst on a nap, Nessa said, if that's not what it means. Down the length of the signal's deck, the board she had abandoned made its wrong sound again. She was back in the chair before the second strip resolved, Taran folding down over her shoulder, the whole room turning as one. Another burst. Same origin, near enough. Same folded-by-hand wrapper, and it came in top to bottom the way the first one had, white ground, hard sun, and this time there was no animal in the frame at all. This time the frame was a close shot, a slate held out at arm's length, the boy's face filling most of it, gaunt and sunburned and grinning like a fool, and he had scratched a word into the dust on the slate's housing with his thumbnail and turned it to the lens so it would come up in the picture, backward and clumsy and unmistakable, 4 block letters. The word was hurry. "Get me a descent plan," Overseer Taran said to the room in the flat, dead voice that his crew had learned meant the opposite of dead. "And get me the Auric." The Auric came aboard the Ledger 11 hours later, and the temperature of the whole cutter changed when they did. There were 3 of them and their beasts, and Warden Ruma who commanded both. The Auric were hunting people. Where the Viharn had spent 10,000 years learning to close doorways, the Auric had spent theirs learning to open throats, and they had brought that whole inheritance up the Ledger's boarding ramp in the shape of 6 low, wide-plated animals that walked without a sound and turned their heads all together when Nessa passed, the way a field of gun barrels turns. The Conquered called them reavers. The Auric did not call them anything a human mouth could manage. They were the Conquered's answer to a certain kind of problem, the kind of problem you could not reason with and could not outrun, and they had a closure record of their own that the Auric were very proud of and never ever put in writing. Warden Ruma was small for her caste, which made her roughly Taran's height, and she wore her rank the way people wear rank they have bled for, which is to say lightly and without a single doubt underneath. She stood on the signal's deck with her helmet under her arm and looked up at the picture. They had left it up. Nobody could quite bring themselves to clear it, and she looked at it for a long time, and where Taran had studied the bridge, Warden Ruma studied the animal. "How big?" she said. "We're working the scale off the boy," Nessa said. "Best estimate nose to tail 11 meters. Mass we won't guess. It's plated over the vitals, spine, skull, the shoulders. The limbs are," she pulled the frame in on the forelimb, the spread of claws. "That. Reach on it. Assume more than you think." Ruma nodded slowly. She had the manner of a person who had spent her life being told to assume less than she thought and had buried the people who did. "It is not restraining him," she said, which was the same thing Nessa had said, and it was strange to hear it in the mouth of a hunter who was reading it a different way. A thing that size, if it wanted the boy contained, the boy would be contained. If it wanted the boy dead, we would not be looking at a photograph. We would be looking at nothing the way we have looked at nothing for 40 years. She tipped her head. It is lying beside him, in the open, on its side, with its throat toward the camera. She said this last as if it were the single most alarming detail in the frame, and to a hunter it was. "Do you understand what that is?" "Tell me," said Taran, who did not. "It is comfortable," Ruma said, An apex does not sleep on its side with its throat exposed beside a thing it has not decided about. It has decided about the boy. The boy is not prey and the boy is not a threat. The boy is, she searched, and landed on a word from her own people that the translator gave to them a half-second late and flat. Kept. The boy is kept. Kept, Taran repeated. It is the word we use, Warden Ruma said, for the young. Nobody said anything to that for a while. Warden, Taran said at last, I am going to ask you the question I brought you up here to ask, and I want you to give me the hunter's answer and not the courtesy. If we put a tender on that hardpan and we go to take the boy, can your reavers hold that animal off him long enough for us to lift? Warden Ruma looked at the picture, at the pale slab, at the throat offered to the sky. No, she said. She said it without a flicker, and it landed in the room like a dropped tool. My reavers are the best killing animals the conquered fields, she went on in the same even voice, and I have taken them into holds that the Viharn Hazard Annex ranks with this world, and they have never failed me, and I will tell you the truth because you asked for it. I would not set them against that. Not to hold it, not to distract it, not to die slowly in front of it while you lift it. Look at how it lies. That is not an animal that has never been challenged. That is an animal that stopped being challenged so long ago it has forgotten to expect it. My reavers would read it before I did. They would read it off the ramp. And then I would have 3 good animals refusing a lawful order in front of a Viharn overseer, which is a thing I would rather resign than watch. She set her helmet down on the console with a soft click. You did not bring me up here to fight that. Whatever you tell yourself. You brought me up here because some part of you already knew what it was, and you wanted a hunter to stand under the picture and confirm it, so that, when you make your decision, you can tell the file you consulted the experts. Taran's mouthparts moved, and your recommendation having been consulted. Do not fight it, Warden Ruma said. You will not win, and worse, you will make it decide that the boy's people are a threat to the thing it has kept. Right now it does not connect the boy to us. The moment you come off that ramp with drawn beasts, it will. She looked, for the first time, at the sleeping child, and something passed over her hard, flat face that Nessa could not name. You have a boy alive on the deadliest ground in the sector, because the deadliest thing on that ground decided to keep him. That is not a problem you solve with force, Overseer. That is a piece of impossible good luck, and the only way to lose it is to reach for your weapons. Then how, Taran said, do we take him off? Warden Ruma smiled, which on an Auric is a thing done with the eyes and not the mouth, and it was not a happy smile. You don't take him, she said, you ask him. And you pray to whatever the Viharn pray to that the boy wants to come, and that the thing that kept him is willing to let him. At the back of the room, on the big display, the sleeping boy did not move, and the animal's one dark eye watched them all, calm as a closed door, out of a world that had never once let anything go. The halo eye opened once a day and stayed open for 4 minutes, and for 2 of those minutes it was open enough to fly through, and Bexley Hart had spent the last 6 hours of his life memorizing exactly what those 2 minutes would cost him if he got the timing wrong. He was 24, and he was the Ledger's descent specialist, which on a recovery cutter that had never once expected to descend, meant he was the youngest person aboard with a rating that mentioned atmosphere, and he had gotten the rating flying medevac skiffs over a colony world's ugly weather, and none of that had prepared him for this, and he knew it. He sat in the left seat of the landing tender with the checklist glowing on the back of his hand, and watched the void come up under them like a wall going flat, and he did the thing his first instructor had taught him, which was to name what was true. True, he said into his own helmet low so the others wouldn't hear. The window is 2 minutes, true. If we're not through in 2 minutes the halo closes on us and we cook, true. I am not going to get the window wrong. He breathed, true, there's a kid down there. In the seat behind him, Nessa Corland had heard every word of it and said nothing, because you did not step on a man's ritual 11 minutes before a descent nobody in 40 years had lived through. She had her own. Hers was the boy's face on the second burst, the grin, the words scratched in the dust. Hurry. She kept it where she could see it. Behind her, filling the rear of the tender, were Warden Ruma and one Reaver. The overseer had fought her on the Reaver and lost, and the shape of the loss told Nessa something about both of them. Ruma had refused to descend with none. You do not walk onto an apex's ground with your hands empty. That is not respect, that is a lie, and it will smell the lie. And Taran had refused to let her descend with the full pack, and they had settled on one, a single Reaver, muzzled and leashed and lying now in the tender's belly with its head between its 4 feet, breathing slow. Its name, in the flattened Concord phonetics, was something like Osk. Ruma had her hand on its shoulder. She had not taken her hand off its shoulder since they'd boarded. It knows, Ruma said to no one watching the animal. Osk, it knows where we're going, feel that, it's already lying down. Is that bad? Bexley said, eyes on the wall of dust coming up. It's honest, said Ruma. 90 seconds, pilot. He flew the eye. Later, Bexley would not be able to describe it to anyone who had not done it, and there was no one who had done it, so he would carry it alone. The halo came apart in front of them along a seam that opened the way a wound opens, dust peeling back off a channel of clear black sky, and he put the tender into that channel, and held it there with both hands and the whole weight of his attention, while the walls of charged dust slid past close enough to strobe the hull with dry lightning, and the clock in the corner of his eye counted down the 2 minutes he had been given, and at 1:40 the seam began, very slightly, to close. He did not tell them. Telling them would not have flown the tender. He fed it more, and the ground came up white and hard and endless, and at 1:58, with the seam narrowing behind them into a bright angry line, the landing tender of the recovery cutter Ledger set down on the surface of Kier 9 in a boil of pale dust, the first conquered vessel in 22 years to touch the death world and mean to leave again. For a moment nobody moved. The dust settled. Through the forward pane the world went out to the horizon in every direction, flat and white and shadowless, a dry salt plain under a sun that stood at the top of the sky and did not seem to move, and it was, Bexley thought, the brightest place he had ever been, and the most silent, and the two facts together made the back of his neck crawl. Origins 2 kilometers north, Nessa said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. The burst came from a ridge, there. She pointed, and there was a ridge, a low, pale spine of harder rock lifting out of the flat, the only feature in a world made of the absence of features. We walk, Bexley said. We walk, said Warden Ruma. The tender stays hot and stays here. If the eye is our only door, the door does not move. She stood, unfolding in the low cabin, and clipped the Reaver's lead short. Slow, hands visible, we are guests. Nobody runs, nobody raises a weapon, nobody makes a sound the boy does not make first. The moment we crest that ridge we are on kept ground, and everything on kept ground answers to something that is not us. They cracked the hatch, and Kier 9 came in. It came in as heat first, a dry hammer of it even through the suits, and then as light, so much light that their visors stepped down twice and still it was too much. And then as smell, the suit scrubbed it but a little got through, the way it always does, a mineral bite, salt and hot stone, and under it, faint, something animal, something warm and old and enormous that had passed this way and would pass again. Osk the Reaver came down the ramp with its belly low and its head lower and did not make a sound. They crossed the flat toward the ridge. It took 40 minutes. Nessa counted her steps to keep from counting other things. They came up the back of the ridge slow, hands out, and near the top Warden Ruma stopped them with a flat hand and went the last few meters alone, on all fours in the manner of her people, and looked over the spine, and was still for a long time. Then she waved them up, one at a time, and put a finger to the place on her helmet where a mouth would be, and they came up beside her and looked down into the shallow bowl on the far side of the ridge, and there, it was, all of it, the whole photograph made real and given depth and made to breathe. The animal lay in the bottom of the bowl in a scrape it had worn into the pan, in the full sun, on its side. It was bigger than the frame had let them believe. 11 meters had been a coward's guess. Its hide was the pale gray-white of old bone and cracked mud both, and where the plating rode the spine and skull it had the dull sheen of horn, and it breathed, slow, the whole vast flank rising and falling, and each breath moved a small storm of dust. Its head was the size of the tender's nose. Its eye was closed. And against its belly, in the shade the animal's own body threw, the only shade for 2 kilometers in any direction, sat the boy. He was awake. He had heard them, or the reaver, or smelled the suits, and he had sat up, and he sat now with his back against the animal's ribs and one knee up, and a length of something in his hands that he had been working at, some braided cord of gut or hide, and he watched them come over the ridge with an expression that took Nessa a moment to read because it was the last expression she had expected. It was not relief. It was not fear. It was the wary, weighing, faintly annoyed look of a person who has finally, after a very long wait, had guests arrive, and is not yet sure they are house-trained. "You took your time," Corin Vale called up the ridge, and his voice cracked on it, 3 weeks unused, but the words came out level. "The eye's a bear, right? You lose your nerve at a minute 40. Everybody does. There's a trick to it. I'll show you." He looked at the reaver and then at Warden Ruma and then back at the reaver, and his hands on the braided cord went still. "That's a hunter's animal," he said, and all the crack was gone out of his voice now. "You brought a hunter's animal onto her ground." "Her," said Ruma. "Her," said Corin. He put the cord down slow and put both hands flat on the pan where they could be seen, mirroring the way they'd come up the ridge, and Nessa understood that he had spent 3 weeks learning a language and was now, patiently, teaching it to the class. "You want to keep your animal, keep it behind you and keep it down and keep its face off her. She won't start it. She doesn't start things. But she finishes them, and she finishes them faster than you can decide to be sorry, so don't let it get any ideas, because it's got a hunter's ideas and she can smell those from here." He tipped his head at the great sleeping bulk behind him. "She's letting her sleep because I told her it was fine. Don't make me a liar." Nobody moved. Osk, at the end of Warden Ruma's short lead, had already made itself as small as an animal its size could be, chin flat to the ground, and Nessa saw Ruma's hand tighten on its shoulder, not to hold it back, to thank it. "He is not lying," Warden Ruma said very quietly on the team channel only. "Whatever he is not lying. Everyone stay exactly as you are." Corin got to his feet. It cost him. They all saw what it cost him, the careful way he did it, the tremor he mastered, 3 weeks of a world that had been slowly using him up. He came up the slope of the bowl toward them a few steps and stopped, well short, and looked at the 3 suited shapes and the animal at their feet, and his eyes went from helmet to helmet, hunting, and Nessa realized what he was doing, and it broke something in her chest. He was counting them. He was looking for faces he knew. "There were 12 of us," Corin said. The level had gone out of his voice. "How many of you came?" 3, Nessa said. She reached up and cracked her visor against every protocol because he needed a face and she was going to give him one. The heat hit her like a slap. She ignored it. "I'm Corland." "Comms off the cutter ledger. We got your pictures, both of them. We came the second we could time the eye." She held his eyes. "We came for you, Corin. That's your name on the manifest, isn't it? Cargo rating C. Vale. We came for you." The boy looked at her cracked-open visor, at her actual face, the first human face he had seen in 22 days, and his own face did a complicated thing, and then locked itself down hard. And Nessa watched a 19-year-old decide, in real time, not to fall apart in front of a hunter's animal on kept ground, because falling apart was a sound and sounds were dangerous. And she thought she had never in her life seen anything braver than that small, ugly act of self-control. "Just me," Corin said. He said it to her, not to the others, because she'd given him a face and you gave the truth to a face. "It's just me. The rest are—" his jaw worked. "The rest didn't make it off the ship." He turned his head out toward the north, toward a place on the flat where the light did something different. A long, low scatter of something dark against all that white, 2 kilometers off, that none of them had let themselves look at directly. "The Marigold's out there," Corin said. "What's left of her? We came down hard. The halo does something to guidance, it did something to ours. We lost the whole descent stack at 8,000 meters and Halloran flew us in dead stick and she nearly," he stopped. "Started again flatter. 6 died in the crash. Halloran and Otts and the others, they were up front. 3 more in the first 2 days before I understood the nights. The nights are the thing that kills you here. It's 40 above at noon and it's 100 below 3 hours after the sun goes. And there's no wood, there's no fuel, there's nothing to burn on this whole rock, and the suits only hold so long, and I watched 3 good people freeze to death in the dark because we didn't understand the nights, and there was nothing I could." "Corin," Nessa said. 2 more went looking for the beacon," he said, and he could not stop now. It was coming out of him the way the burst had come up through the halo, everything at once because it had been held so long. "The beacon we came for, the 40-year-old one. It's real, it's out there. It's why we, Petra and Coyle, went to find it on day 4 because Petra said if the first expedition put a beacon there might be shelter. There might be a reason it was still pinging. There might be, and they didn't come back, and I don't know, that's 9. That's 9. And then it was just me and Sunday, and then it was just me." "Sunday," Nessa said. The boy looked back over his shoulder at the vast sleeping animal, and the thing that came over his gaunt, sunburned face then was so simple and so complete that every one of them recognized it, across 3 species, without a word of translation. "That's her name," Corin said, "Sunday. I lost the days after the crash. I didn't know what day it was anymore, so I just started calling every day the same day, so it wouldn't matter that I'd lost count. And she turned up on one of them. So," he shrugged, a small, exhausted human shrug. "Sunday." Warden Ruma had spent her whole life closing the distance between herself and dangerous animals, and she had never in that life felt the particular thing she felt now, which was the certainty that she was the one being permitted. She had come down into the bowl a step at a time, Osk pressed to her heel and flat to the ground, and she had stopped at the range her instincts told her was the last safe range, and then made herself take 3 more steps past it, because the boy had taken them and the boy was still breathing. Now she stood close enough to the animal called Sunday to see the grain of its hide, the old scars laid over it like a map of a long argument the world had eventually stopped having with it, the slow tide of its breathing, the dust that lifted and fell with each one. Its eye was closed. It knew she was there. It was not the sleep of a thing that did not know she was there. It was the sleep of a thing that had weighed her and found her beneath its notice, and being beneath the notice of an apex, Ruma understood, was the only form of safety this ground offered, and it was a gift, and the boy had arranged it. "Osk will not look at it," she said quietly, on the open channel now so they could all hear, because they needed to understand what they were standing next to. "I have led this animal into a nest of blood hunters on terrace and it walked in with its head up. It has never once refused ground. It will not lift its face to this. Do you understand what I am telling you? My Reaver has decided on its own without an order that the correct posture in the presence of this animal is the posture of the young before the old. It is deferring. A conquered Reaver is deferring to an Earth boy's," she stopped, because that was wrong, and she corrected herself with a hunter's precision. "To the animal an Earth boy calls Sunday. There is a rank order on this ground and we are not in it, and the boy is, and he is not at the bottom." "Copy that," said Bexley Hart, in a small voice, from up on the ridge where he had been told to stay with a clear line to the tender. "He's near the top, actually," Corin said. He had come to stand near Ruma, near enough that Nessa's heart climbed into her throat, and he put his hand flat on the animal's foreleg the way you would set your hand on the fender of a car, casual, proprietary home. The claws near his boots were each the length of his shin. He did not appear to see them. Not the top. She's the top. But I eat before Osk would, if that makes sense. She'd let me at a kill before she'd let your hunter's animal within 100 meters of it. I've watched her do it, not with Osk, with the other things out here, the scavengers, the little pack things that come at night. She puts herself between me and them, and she doesn't even get up. She just lifts her head. He said it the way you would describe a habit of a family pet. They go away. How, Nessa said. She had her visor cracked and the heat was cooking the side of her face and she did not care. Corin, how did this happen? How are you alive, and how is that thing? You want the whole thing. We've got, Nessa checked. We've got the eye in 6 hours. We've got time, yeah. I want the whole thing. So the boy sat down in the shade of the apex predator of Kier 9, with his back against its ribs where the shade was, and he told them, and the three of them stood or crouched in a loose arc at the edge of the shade and listened. And 2 kilometers north the wreck of the Marigold threw its long dark scatter across the white, and above them, unseen past the halo, the overseer waited. The crash was on what I've been calling day 0, Corin said. You know most of it. We lost the stack, Halloran flew her in, 6 of us walked away, and it should have been none. And then it was just the survival stuff for a while. Suits, water, the ration printer still worked if you bobbied it. We buried the 6. That took a day. Out here the ground's like concrete. We did what we could. He looked at his hands. Then the first night came, and I already told you about the nights. That's 3 more. 9 of us on day 0, 6 on day 3. And the whole time there's this thing you feel out on the flat, this. You can't see anything. It's flat as a table for 100 kilometers, but you feel watched. And at night when the little pack things come in close and yip at the suits, you hear something bigger move out past them, and the little things scatter. And on day 4 Petra decided we had to know what was out there, and she and Coyle took the working suit batteries and went north to the beacon, because the beacon meant somebody had once thought this place was survivable enough to leave a machine running, and he stopped. They didn't come back. That's when I understood I was going to die here. Not scared. Just I did the arithmetic. 2 of us left, Ren and me, and Ren's suit was failing, and I did the arithmetic and it came out 0. Ren, Nessa said gently, because there was a name there she hadn't heard. Ren was the medic. Ren kept me together those first days, and then on day 6 Ren's suit gave out in the night and I couldn't fix it, and I held on to him and it wasn't enough, and in the morning I was the only one. Corin's voice was flat and level and terrible. So that's it. That's 11. 9 in the first week, and then 2 more of us, just 2 of us made it a week, and then it was 1. And I want you to hear me say their names before you take me off this rock, because somebody up there is going to close a file and I need it on the record that I said them. Halloran, Otz, Bisquet, Duna, Witt, Sorrel, Petra, Coyle, Ren, and Eli and Marn, who I found under the forward section on day 2 and could not get to. He counted them on his fingers, all 11, out loud in the sun. Say them back to me, Combs. Say you got them. Nessa said them back. All 11. She got them right on the first try because she had been living inside that manifest for 19 days and she owed him at least that. The Reaver Osk lay still. Warden Ruma bowed her head, which is a thing the Auric do for their own dead and had never, in the recorded history of contact, been observed to do for anyone else's. Sunday came on the 8th day, Corin said, and the whole register of him changed, warmed, the way a room changes when someone opens a door onto sunlight. I'd stopped moving. I was just sitting by the wreck waiting to be done, and I looked up and she was there. Just there, the way she gets there, no sound, this wall of an animal, 30 meters off, looking at me. And I want to tell you I was brave. I wasn't. I was so far past brave I'd come out the other side into not caring. I looked at the biggest predator I'd ever seen in my life, close enough to end me before I finished a thought, and I was too tired to be afraid, and I think, he frowned, working it out again, the way you work out a thing you've turned over 100 nights. I think that's the whole thing. I think that's why I'm alive. Because everything else that ever met her ran, or fought, or made noise, and prey runs and rivals fight, and both of those are things she knows what to do with. And I just sat there. I didn't run and I didn't fight and I didn't make a sound. I just looked at her because I was too worn out to do anything else, and I think, his voice went quiet, I think she'd never had anything look at her like that, like it wasn't going to run, like it had already given up being a threat and hadn't bothered to become prey. I confused her. I think for 8 days on this whole dead world I was the only interesting thing that had ever happened to her, and she couldn't work me out. And she couldn't work me out so hard that she didn't kill me. And by the time she'd have gotten around to it, I'd stopped being a stranger. That's not how Apex behavior, Warden Ruma started, and then stopped, because she was looking at a boy alive against the ribs of an Apex, and there is a point past which you stop telling the ground how it is supposed to work. She stayed that night, Corin said, 30 meters off. And it got cold, that 100 below cold, and my suit was doing what it could and it wasn't enough, and I was going the way Ren went. I could feel it, that warm feeling that's a lie, and I remember thinking I didn't want to die 30 meters from the only living thing on the planet. That seemed stupid, so he laughed, short, disbelieving at his own younger self, 3 weeks younger, a lifetime. I crawled over to her. On my hands and knees, in the dark dying, I crawled toward the apex predator of a death world because she was the only warm thing for 100 kilometers, and I got to her side, and she was like a furnace. They run hot. Whatever she is, she runs hot, and I got into the lee of her out of the wind against all that heat, and I waited to find out if she'd let me. He put his hand flat on the ribs behind him. She let me. She didn't move. I fell asleep against her, expecting to not wake up either way, cold or her. And I woke up in the morning and she was still there, and I was still warm and I was still alive. And that was the first night I didn't lose anybody. Because the thing everyone was afraid of turned out to be the only thing on this rock that would keep me warm. Nobody said anything. Up on the ridge, Bexley Hart had his hand over his own mouth inside his helmet. After that it was just us, Corin said simply. She hunts, I don't ask what. She comes back and she brings things sometimes. She'll drop something by me the way he caught Ruma's eye and didn't say the word cat. The way they do. I don't eat it. I've got the printer, but she brings it. I made the compressor out of the suit rig and the slate, and I climbed the ridge and figured out the eye, and I sent you the picture, and then I waited, and here you are. He spread his hands. That's the whole thing, Combs. There's no trick. I didn't tame anything. I was just too tired to run, on the one day it mattered, in front of the one animal that had never seen that before. That's the whole miracle. I got lucky in the specific shape of how I was dying. 200,000 kilometers up, past the halo, Overseer Taran listened to all of it come in on the relay. 4 minutes delayed and thinned by the eye. And when it was done, he stood a long time in the quiet of the signals deck with the picture still up on the display behind him. And he found that his certainty, the thing he had built a career on, the early closed file, had a crack running through it that he could not tape over. Overseer, his relay officer, a younger V. Harn, hesitant. The consortium file, 22 years ago. You asked me to pull it while they were down. And the mixed scientific mission, their last supply manifest before they went dark. The younger V. Harn's mouthparts moved uncertainly. It requested, among the standard loadout, I did not understand it at first, it requested a substantial upweight in feed, animal feed, livestock grade, enough to sustain a large animal for an extended period. There is a margin note. It is in the mission lead's hand. He hesitated. It says she is still coming to the fence. It says, do not let the resupply pilot fire on her. Taran was very still. They knew, the overseer said. 22 years ago, someone else's expedition. They found the same thing this boy found, and they were feeding it at a fence, and then they went dark, and we closed the file and called the whole world a graveyard. He turned to the display, to the one dark calm eye. How many of the 140, he said slowly, do you suppose actually died of the world? And how many of them died the day the resupply pilot got nervous and fired on the animal that was coming to the fence? The younger V. Harn had no answer, because it was not a question with an answer, only a question with a cost. "Get me the surface," Taran said. "I want to talk to the boy." But the surface just then had a different problem because the eye had come around early. It was Bexley who caught it first, up on the ridge with the clean line to the tender, watching the halo the way a sailor watches weather, and he saw the seam of clear sky begin to peel open to the northeast a full 90 minutes before the charts said it should, and he understood in the same breath two things: that the charts had been built from 22-year-old data and the eye was not a clock, it was a tide, and tides drift. And that if this early opening was real, and it closed on the early schedule too, then their window home was going to slam shut while they were still 2 kilometers from the tender with a starved boy who could barely stand. "Eyes opening," he said hard on the channel. "Northeast, it's early, this is not the window we planned. Warden Corland, we have to move now. If this closes on the early cycle we lose the tender's launch window, and we are down here for another full day." "Another full night," Nessa said, and looked at Corin, and Corin looked at the sky, and then looked at the animal at his back, and something in his gaunt face settled into a shape she would remember for the rest of her life, which was the shape of a boy who has just realized he is not, after all, going to get to leave the easy way. "Then it's another night," Corin said. Okay, everybody listen to me because I've done 22 of these and you've done none." He was already moving, already checking the sky, already the most competent person on the surface of the planet. "You are not making that tender before the eye shuts. It's 2 kilometers, the boy can't run and the boy is me, and I'm telling you I can't run. So we don't run. We don't panic and we don't run, because panic is a sound and running is a sound, and this is the wrong ground to make sounds on after dark." He turned and put his hand on the great pale flank, and for the first time since they'd come over the ridge, the animal's eye opened, slow, and found him, and Nessa watched a 19-year-old cargo raiding look a Deathworld's apex predator in the eye and give it, of all things, an apology. "Sorry girl," Corin said. "Company staying over, I know, but they're mine so they're yours." "All right." He looked back at the 3 suited shapes, at the reaver flat on the ground, at the sky peeling open early and wrong. "Get down off the ridge," he said. "All of you. Down here in the lee close. When the sun goes it's going to try to kill you, and there's exactly one thing on this planet that's going to keep that from happening, and she's letting you stay because I asked. So get in close and keep your animal down, and whatever comes yipping out of the dark tonight, and things will come, you do not make a sound and you do not run and you let her handle it." He almost smiled. "Welcome to my house. It's not much, but nothing's ever gotten in." The sun went down on Kier 9 the way a door closes on a furnace, all at once, and the cold came up out of the ground to meet it. Bexley's heart had flown whether that killed people. He had thought he understood cold. He learned in the first 20 minutes after the sun touched the horizon that he had understood nothing, because the cold on Kier 9 was not weather, it was a fact, a hard descending fact that fell on the white plain the moment the light left and kept falling, and his suit's readout began to slide, and he watched the number that was supposed to keep him alive start losing a degree, and another, faster than the suit could fight it. And he understood that Corin Vale had watched 3 people die, inside numbers exactly like the one he was watching now. "Closer," Corin said. He had them arranged before the light was fully gone, and he arranged them the way a man deals cards he has dealt 10,000 times. Nessa against the animal's belly, in the deep lee, because Nessa had cracked her visor and lost the most heat, and Corin had noticed and said nothing, and simply put her where the furnace was hottest. Bexley next, then the boy himself, then Warden Ruma at the outer edge with Osk pressed against her, because Ruma had insisted the reaver be the buffer between the strangers and the dark, and Corin had looked at her for a second and then nodded, hunter to hunter, and let her have it. Closer than that. She won't mind. She runs hot and she's got heat to spare, and the whole point of a thing this size is thermal mass. She holds the day's heat and gives it back all night. That's how I've lived through 22 of these. Get your backs against her. Trust the animal. I know what I'm asking. Do it anyway." They did it. There is a particular humility in putting your back against the ribs of the thing your entire civilization has spent 40 years being afraid of because the alternative is freezing. And all four of them found it that night, one after another. And the animal called Sunday lay in her worn scrape in the pan, and took their weight and their cold against her flank and breathed, slow, and gave back the day's heat exactly as the boy had promised, and did not so much as lift her head. "Talk quiet if you talk," Corin said. "She doesn't care about talking. It's sharp sounds, panic sounds, prey sounds. A scream will bring the whole plane in, but talking's fine. I talked to her all night some nights, kept me sane." He was a shape in the dark now, the suit's faint status glows the only light, and above them the sky had gone to a black so complete and so crowded with stars that it did not look like a sky at all. It looked like the bottom of something. "Comms, you still with me?" "Still here," Nessa said. Her teeth were trying to chatter and she was mastering them because he'd said sharp sounds. "It's working, though the heat. It's working. I can feel my readout coming back up." "Yeah," Corin said. "She's good at it. Best furnace in the sector." A pause. "Tell me about up there. The cutter. Tell me something normal. I haven't had normal in 3 weeks and I could use some before the pack shows." So Nessa told him, low into the enormous dark, about the ledger, about the graveyard shift and the empty chairs, about the coffee that came out of the printer tasting of the printer, about Overseer Taran and his 19 closed files, and the way he'd stood under the picture of the boy asleep, and been unable, for once, to close a thing early. She talked because it kept the boy anchored and because it kept her own teeth still, and the two aliens listened, and somewhere out on the flat, 40 minutes into full dark, the first of the pack things began to call. It started as a single thin yip far off, and then an answer closer, and then a scatter of them. A loose, ragged chorus circling in from the north where the wreck was. Small, quick, hungry sounds. And Bexley felt every hair he had stand up inside his suit because his whole body knew that sound in a way that had nothing to do with his mind. The sound of things that had learned that the cold did their killing for them, and they only had to come collect. "Here we go," Corin murmured. "Okay, this is the part where you trust me. Nobody moves. Nobody stands. Nobody points a light. Osk stays down. Warden, keep it down. I mean it. If it gets up, they'll read it as a rival, and it'll get loud, and loud is the one thing we can't have. They're going to come in close. They're going to come in real close, close enough you'll want to do something, and you're not going to do anything, because the second you do something you become a thing that does something, and right now you're just a lump of cold against a big warm rock they're afraid of. Stay a lump. Can everybody stay a lump?" "Staying a lump," Bexley whispered, and hated how his voice shook, and Corin in the dark huffed something that was almost a laugh. "Good man. First night I stayed a lump I cried the whole time. No shame in it, just do it quiet." They came in. Nessa never saw them clearly, quick low pale shapes at the edge of the status glows, more sound than form. 12 of them, 24, circling the great dark bulk of the sleeping animal at a radius that shrank and shrank as their courage built, yipping to each other, working themselves up, smelling the 4 soft warm strangers tucked against the furnace and not quite believing their luck. She pressed her back into Sunday's ribs and felt the slow furnace breathing of the animal against her spine and made herself a lump, a cold, quiet lump, while the Deathworld scavengers closed the last of the distance, and one of them, bolder than the rest, darted in to within a body length of Warden Ruma's boots. Sunday lifted her head. That was all. Nessa felt it more than saw it, a shift in the great mass at her back, the enormous head coming up off the ground on the long neck, turning, unhurried, toward the bold one at the edge of the light. The animal did not rise. It did not roar. It made no sound Nessa's ears could find at all, though later Bexley swore he'd felt something, a pressure, a subsonic thing that had gone through his chest like a hand. Sunday simply lifted her head and looked at the pack the way a landlord looks at a door someone has knocked on too late, and held it, one long moment, the one dark eye open in the dark. The plane emptied. There was no fight. That was the thing none of them was prepared for, the thing that Warden Ruma, who had spent her life in the noise of fights, would try and fail to describe to the overseer afterward. There was no snap, no rush, no scream, no scatter of a killed thing. There was a pack of 24 hungry scavengers a body length from a warm meal, and there was an apex lifting its head, and then, between one breath and the next, there was simply nobody on the plane but them. The pack folding back into the dark all at once, without a sound, the way a tide goes out, because every animal on Kier 9 except the boy had learned across 10,000 years of nights that when that head came up you were already, in every way that would shortly matter, gone. That's it, Corin said softly, into the ringing quiet. That's the whole show. They'll circle a while and try again toward dawn when she gets deeper asleep near dawn, and they know it, they've got the timing worked out, little bastards are smart. But she'll do it again. She'll do it as many times as it takes. His voice was warm and tired and absolutely certain. Told you nothing gets in. Warden Ruma sat in the dark with her hand on her reaver, and her reaver's head was flat to the ground, and had never once come up, and the warden of the Auric Hunt Corps understood that she had just watched an animal do, with the lift of its head, a thing her entire pack could not have done with tooth and claw and her own blood spent alongside them, and that the animal had done it not for territory and not for a kill, but because a starved human boy had told it once. That 4 cold strangers were his, and therefore hers. Warden, Nessa whispered, you all right? I am recalculating, Ruma said, a number of things I believed about the order of the world. A pause. The boy is teaching a conquered reaver to lie still through a scavenger raid, my reaver. In one night, Osk will not forget this. When we lift, if we lift, I will have an animal that has learned there is a rank above me, and I do not know yet whether that ruins it as a weapon or makes it something I do not have a word for. He does that, Nessa said, and did not entirely know what she meant, only that it was true. He just arranges things, and then they're arranged. The relay came through an hour before dawn, when the eye's edge scraped past far to the east and let a thread of signal down for 90 seconds, and it was Overseer Taran's flat voice, and it was not addressed to Nessa or to Ruma. It was addressed to the boy. Cargo raiding Vale, Taran said, 200,000 kilometers up into the last of the night. This is the overseer of the recovery cutter Ledger. I am told you asked that your dead be entered on the record by name. They have been. All 11. I entered them myself in the permanent file, and I entered beside them the note that you survived because you did not run, which is a thing this file has never before been able to write about anyone. I want you to hear that from me before I ask you the thing I have to ask you. Corin, in the dark, went very still against the animal's side. Ask it, he said. The consortium expedition, 22 years ago, Taran said. 140 personnel. We have always logged them as lost to the environment. But I have their last manifest in front of me, and it shows them feeding a large animal at a fence, and it shows a mission leads note asking that a nervous pilot not fire on that animal, and then it shows silence, and I have spent this night on a question I cannot answer alone. The overseer's voice did not change, but something under it did. Did you ever find them, in 3 weeks on that ground near that beacon? Did you ever find what became of the ones who came before you and tried to feed her at a fence? Corin was quiet for a long moment. I found the fence, he said. Petra and Coyle were headed for the beacon, and I went out that way once later after Sunday, when I could go places because I was with her. It's a station, an old one, the first expedition's half buried, and there's a fence, a real fence, a paddock fence like you'd build for stock, and it's torn down. Not knocked down, torn from the outside in. He drew a breath. And there's no bones inside the fence, overseer. There's no crash, no wreck of a fight, no, it's not a battlefield. It's just a torn-down fence around an empty station, and a beacon still pinging 40 years later, and I think—" his young voice steadied into something older. "I think somebody got scared. I think somebody built a fence between themselves and the only warm thing on the planet and started treating a guest like a specimen. And I think one day a pilot got nervous, exactly like your note says, and fired on her at the fence, and I think she tore the fence down. And I think after that they didn't understand what they'd broken and they kept doing soldier things, kept the walls up, kept the weapons out, and the nights kept coming and there was no furnace anymore because they'd made an enemy of the furnace. That's what killed the 140 overseer, not the world. The world's survivable. I'm proof it's survivable. They died of the fence. They died the day they decided the apex predator of a death world was a threat to be managed instead of a neighbor to be." He stopped, and the word he landed on was so plain it went through all of them. Polite, too. The relay held for 3 more seconds, just long enough. "Thank you, cargo rating Vale," said Overseer Taran, and the eye scraped shut, and the thread was gone, and up on the ledger the Overseer sat alone with a 40-year-old ghost and a torn-down fence, and the growing, unwelcome, undeniable understanding that the deadliest world in his sector had been trying, for 22 years, to keep somebody warm, and had been shot at for its trouble, and had waited, patient as stone, for someone to come along too tired to be afraid. Dawn came up over Kier 9 the way the cold had come down, all at once, a hammer of white light over the eastern flat, and the 4 of them were alive, all 4, which no group of strangers had ever been on that ground after a night. And the pack had tried twice more before dawn, exactly as the boy had said, and twice more the great head had lifted, and twice more the plane had emptied. And now the sun stood up hard and hot, and the furnace at their backs stirred and stretched. One vast, slow, luxuriant stretch that lifted the whole front of her off the ground and dropped it again in a boom of dust, and yawned. And the yawn was a thing the size of a hatchway lined in ivory. And Bexley Hart watched the apex predator of a death world yawn a body length from his face and did not flinch. Because he had spent a night learning that the yawn was not the dangerous part. "Morning, girl," Corin said and put his hand on her jaw, and she leaned fractionally into the hand. "See, everybody's still here. Told you they were house-trained." He looked around the arc of them, the 2 aliens, the human comms tech, the young pilot with an expression that had overnight lost its wariness and found something harder to look at, which was hope. "Okay," he said. "Sun's up. I comes around in about 6 hours if the tide holds. Let's talk about how we all get off this rock. Because I've been thinking about it all night, and there's a problem, and the problem's got a name, and her name's Sunday." The problem was simple to say and impossible to solve, and Corin said it in the flat morning light with his hand still on the animal's jaw. "I'm not leaving her." Nessa had known it was coming from the shape of the night, and she still felt it land. "Corin." "No, listen." He turned to face them, all of them, and he was 19 and starved and sunburned, and he stood in front of the largest predator in the sector like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, which for him it now was. "I left 11 people on this rock. I couldn't help it. I know I couldn't help it. Everybody's going to tell me I couldn't help it. And I've had 3 weeks to know in my head that I couldn't help it. And I still hear Ren's suit failing every time it gets quiet. 11. And the one thing on this whole dead world that didn't die, the one thing that kept me warm, the one thing that kept me alive so you'd have somebody to come get. You want me to walk up a ramp and leave her standing on the flat watching me go." His voice cracked and he let it. "I've done my leaving. I've done all the leaving I'm ever going to do. She goes or I don't. She is an apex predator of a Class 1 death world," Warden Ruma said, but she said it gently, and she said it like a hunter laying out ground, not like a person arguing. "There is no cage on the ledger built for her. There is no cage in the sector built for her. And even if there were, you saw her last night. You cannot put that behind bars. You put that behind bars and you make it what the consortium made it. You make it the thing at the fence." She looked at the boy. "You of all people know that. You told the overseer that. You cannot save her by fencing her, boy. The fence is what killed the last people who loved her. Then not a cage, Corin said. Not a fence. I don't want a fence. I want— He stopped hunting for it and then found it, and it was the simplest thing, and it undid them all. I want to ask her, that's all. That's all I've ever done with her. I don't make her do anything. I ask, and sometimes she says yes. So we're not going to trap her, and we're not going to dart her, and we're not going to point one single weapon at her, because the second you do that, she's gone, and probably you're gone too. We're going to bring a ramp down, and I'm going to walk up it, and I'm going to see if she follows me. And if she follows me, then she wanted to come, and no cage in the sector matters because she chose it. And if she doesn't follow me, his jaw set, then I stay. Because I am not standing at the top of a ramp watching another one of mine get left behind on this planet. I'm done. I'm done leaving people. She's people. Ask anybody who was against her ribs last night. Nobody argued. There was nothing to argue. Even Ruma, who had come down to this world certain that the animal was a problem to be managed, stood in the morning light and understood that the boy had just described the only version of this that was not the fence, and that it was a terrible plan, and that it was the only plan that did not end the way the last one had, 22 years ago, in a torn-down paddock, and 140 names. The tender cannot lift her, Bexley said quietly, doing the job that was his to do. Even if she walks up a ramp of her own free will and I'd pay a year's wages to see it, she doesn't fit. Mass alone, I couldn't fly the eye with that in the belly. I couldn't fly the eye with a quarter of that. We'd need the heavy lander off the ledger, the cargo bird. And the cargo bird can't fly the eye we came through. It's too big for a 2-minute window. It needs a wide one. It needs a spring tide. He looked at Nessa. Your comms. You've been living in the halo data. Is there a spring tide coming? Nessa was already in it, already scrolling the surface slate's cached charts against the 22-year-old ephemeris, already doing the arithmetic that had become, over 19 days, the native language of her hands. There's a wide eye the tide's got a long cycle under the short one, a spring opening. The charts say, she frowned. The charts are 22 years old and the tide drifts. We saw it drift 90 minutes yesterday, so I don't trust the number, but the pattern says there's a wide eye due in about 30 hours. Big one. Maybe 8-9 minutes wide open, wide enough for the heavy lander. 30 hours, Corin said. 2 more nights. 2 more nights, Nessa agreed. She looked at him. Can we do 2 more nights? And Corin Vale, who had done 22 of them, looked at the 4 strangers his animal had kept alive through one, and something that had been clenched in him for 3 weeks eased a fraction, because for the first time since day 0, he was not counting down to being the only one left. He was counting up. Yeah, he said. Yeah, we can do 2 more nights. She can do 2 more nights standing on her head. He almost smiled. Comms, get on the eye and tell your overseer to send down the cargo bird on the spring tide, and tell him to send it empty. No cage, no darts, no hunters. One warden's animal down here is already one more than she'd like. No offense, Ruma. None taken, said Ruma, whose reaver had spent the night with its face in the dirt. An empty bird, an open ramp, and the patience to let this take as long as it takes. That's the whole plan. That's the only plan that works. Tell him it has to be his choice, because if the Conquered decides she's a specimen, if anybody up there decides she's a threat to be managed, the boy's voice went hard and old, then we're the fence. And I've read the end of that story. It's out there, torn down in the sand. Nessa sent it up on the next eye. And 30 hours, it turned out, was exactly enough time for the story to try to end the wrong way. The Directorate cutter jumped in at the edge of the system 9 hours later, and Overseer Taran knew what it was before its transponder finished resolving, because he had spent 40 years learning to recognize the particular silhouette of institutions that arrived after the danger had been found, and before the credit had been assigned. Her name was the Sufficiency, and she was a security science hull of the Conquered Directorate, and she carried an assessor named Vol Thren, and Assessor Thren had been listening to the ledger's traffic for the last 9 hours over the long relay. And Assessor Thren had reached a conclusion, and the conclusion was tidy, and the conclusion was wrong. And it was delivered to Overseer Taron's signals deck with the bloodless confidence of a person who had never once spent a night with his back against the thing he was about to make a decision about. Overseer Taron. Thren's image resolved on the display, a V-Harn of the Directorate cast, younger than Taron, immaculate, the plating of the face polished in the way that told you the wearer had never been anywhere the polish would come off. I've reviewed your file. Extraordinary work locating the survivor. The Directorate will see that it's recognized. A pause, the exact length of a knife being unfolded. Now, about the specimen. There is no specimen, Taron said. There is a boy, and there is the animal that kept him alive. There is, said Assessor Thren, the first live apex organism ever confirmed on Kier 9, a world that has consumed 140 personnel and 3 expeditions, and there is a Directorate mandate, 40 years standing, that this world is a Category 1 hazard whose biology is to be contained on contact or neutralized if containment is not feasible. I've read your surface team's proposal. An open ramp. No cage, no restraint, no security element. You propose to invite a confirmed Category 1 apex predator to board a conquered vessel of its own volition. Thren's mouthparts moved in something that was almost pity. Overseer, with respect for your years, that is not a recovery plan. That is a hostage negotiation in which the hostage is the entire crew of 2 cutters, and you are proposing to lose it. The consortium contained it, Taron said. 22 years ago, they built a fence. Would you like to know how the containment plan resolved? I know how it resolved. The world killed them, which is precisely why. The world did not kill them. Taron's voice did not rise. It never rose. But every V-Harn on the signals deck felt the temperature of it drop, and the humans, who could not read a V-Harn's registers, felt it anyway. They built a fence between themselves and the only warm thing on a world that freezes hard enough to kill in a night, and then a nervous pilot fired on that warm thing at the fence, and the warm thing tore the fence down, and after that they had made an enemy of the one thing on Kier 9 that could have kept them alive, and so they froze, 140 of them over a season, behind their excellent containment. I have the manifest, Assessor. I have the mission lead's own hand. She is still coming to the fence. Do not let the pilot fire on her, and the pilot fired on her. And that not the world, not the biology, the fence and the frightened pilot, that is the closure event for 140 souls, and I will burn my rank to ash before I let the Directorate write that same event a second time on my file, over a boy who is alive, on that ground at this moment, only because somebody finally didn't build the fence. The signals deck was very quiet. You've grown attached, Overseer, Assessor Thren said softly. It happens on long files. That's what the Directorate is for, to make the decision the people on the ground have lost the distance to make. The sufficiency will make the surface approach. We will bring the survivor up, and we will contain or neutralize the specimen per mandate. You are relieved of the biological question as of now. Attend to your boy. The image did not wait for a reply. The sufficiency is moving to the eye, Thren out. The display went dark, and Overseer Taron stood in front of it for exactly 3 seconds, which was as long as he permitted himself for anything, and then he turned to his relay officer. Raise the surface, he said, priority. Whatever the eye will carry. Overseer, the eye's not open for another. Then raise it the instant it cracks and not 1 second after, and until then get me every specification the sufficiency filed on entry. I want her heavy lander loadout. I want her security manifest. I want to know exactly what Assessor Thren is planning to bring down that ramp. Taron's mouthparts worked, the small dry motion, and for the first time in the memory of anyone aboard the ledger, the Overseer who closed his files early looked like a man about to pry one open with his bare hands. The Directorate is going to make the fence. 22 years later, to the letter, They are going to build the fence and hand a frightened pilot a weapon and point it at her at the fence. And there is a boy standing between the fence and the animal, and he has already told us he will not move. He started for the hatch, faster than a V-Harn his age had any business moving. Get me down there. I am going to the surface. Overseer, the eye, you can't fly the small tender, it's on the ground, and the cargo bird can't. Then I fly down with the sufficiency's approach, Taran said, in the last seat of the last lander, whether the assessor wants me or not, because I have closed 19 files and I have never once been on the ground when the closure happened, and I am not going to spend the 20th up here reading about the fence in a report. He stopped in the hatchway. Corlin's people held that boys dead by name last night. All 11. I am not going to make it 12 because a polished child from the directorate has never been cold. They went to the fence on the second day, because Corrin said they should, and because there were hours to fill before the spring tide, and because some part of all of them needed to see the end of the story they had only heard. They could go now, out onto the open flat in daylight, in a way that no conquered team had ever been able to go, because Sunday came with them. Corrin walked at her shoulder, and the rest of them walked in the lee of her enormous slow shadow, the only moving shade on 100 kilometers of white, and nothing on that plane came near them. Nothing yipped, nothing watched from a middle distance, because the middle distance belonged to her, and everything in it knew the exact radius of her tolerance and kept outside it. Warden Ruma walked with Osk off the lead entirely now. She had unclipped it that morning, an act of trust or surrender or both, and the Reaver walked at her heel and did not once drift toward the great pale animal, did not once lift its face to her, and Ruma watched her own killing animal choose deference, and felt the ground of her whole profession shift a degree beneath her boots. The station was 4 kilometers north and west, past the wreck of the Marigold, which they did not approach, and which Corrin looked at once for a long moment and then did not look at again. The station was exactly what he had said. It rose out of the pan half buried, a cluster of prefabricated domes gone the color of the plain, the first expeditions, 40 years dead, and around the largest dome ran the fence. It was a paddock fence. That was the thing that broke Nessa a little, seeing it, that it was so ordinary, so agricultural, so human. A stock fence of the kind you would build to keep a large animal in or out, posts driven into the concrete hard pan at great cost of labor, run with heavy cable, and it was torn down along its whole northern length. The posts snapped off at the base and flung. The cable parted and curled back like something that had been under enormous tension, and then all at once was not. From the outside in, Bexley said quietly, reading it the way you read a crash. From the outside in, Corrin agreed. He walked to the gap in the fence and stood in it, and Sunday stopped at the edge of the torn ground and did not come further, and Nessa noticed that and filed it. This is where they fed her. Look. He crouched and brushed at the pan, and there were channels worn in it, old ones, the kind of where a large animal makes coming to the same spot day after day for a long time. She came here, for I don't know, weeks, months, however long it was before it went bad. They put feet out over the fence, and she came every day and stood right about. He stepped to a worn place, here, and they got their data and their samples and their images, and they never once had to be afraid because they'd built a fence, and the fence made them feel like the ones in charge. He stood up. And then one day something spooked somebody. The note says a resupply pilot. Maybe she was closer than usual. Maybe she made a sound. Maybe the pilot was new and the fence made him feel safe enough to be stupid, and he fired on her. At the fence. The one place on the planet she'd learned it was safe to come. He turned and looked back at her, standing patient at the edge of the torn ground, refusing to cross it, and Nessa understood all at once why the animal would not step over the line of the broken fence, and it went through her like the cold had. She won't come inside it, Nessa said. Even now, even torn down, even with you. She looked at the boy. This is where they hurt her. This is where they hurt her, Corrin said. 40 years ago, and she still won't cross it. That's how long an animal remembers being betrayed by the thing it came to trust. He looked around the dead station, the domes, the fence, the worn channels of 100 faithful visits ending in one gunshot. And here's the part I can't stop thinking about. After she tore it down, she didn't leave. She could have gone anywhere. It's her whole planet. But there's where here that's newer than 40 years. She kept coming back. Not to the fence, she won't cross the fence, but near it. She kept coming back near the place where the last people who fed her used to be, long after they were gone, long after there was any feed, for years, for decades, waiting at the edge of the ground where she wasn't welcome anymore, for somebody to come back and not build a fence. His voice was steady, and it was the steadiness that made it unbearable. That's why the beacon matters. It never stopped pinging because it was never about a rescue. She's the reason it's still on. Every so often something crosses that station and trips the old contact plate, a big slow something, coming to the edge of the fence line, checking, the way you check a mailbox. For 22 years, she's been checking the mailbox. And then we crashed a survey tender 40 kilometers south, and a boy too tired to run sat down in the sand, and she came because she is still, after everything, an animal that came when people were kind and got shot for it and kept coming anyway. He put his hand flat on the nearest standing fence post. So no, we are not building the fence, not one board of it. If she comes up that ramp, it's because a person was kind to her and didn't lie about it. And if that's not enough, then she's owed the right to say no, and I'll stay, and I'll be the person who came back and didn't leave. Somebody owes her that. Might as well be me. Overseer Taran heard the recording of it that evening, relayed up on the eye, sitting in the last seat of a lander he had bullied his way onto, and he closed the log and sat in the dark of the Sufficiency's hold among a security element that would not meet his eye, and he thought, the boy has understood in 3 weeks what an entire scientific mission failed to understand in a season, and the directorate has failed to understand in 40 years. The animal is not the hazard. The fence is the hazard. And they are about to build the fence, out of the finest materials the conquered can manufacture, and hand it to a frightened young assessor who has never been cold, and pointed at her at the exact place she was last betrayed. He began, very quietly in the dark of the hold, to plan. The second night on the surface was easier than the first, because they knew the shape of it now, and because a thing shared once is a thing that can be born again. They banked against the furnace, and the pack came, and the head came up, and the plane emptied, and this time nobody cried, though Bexley admitted later he'd wanted to, from a different reason than the first night. And in the small hours, banked against the animal's slow-breathing warmth under the crowded black sky, Nessa found herself next to Corin in the dark. And they talked, low, the way you can only talk to a person at the bottom of a long night. "You're not going to stay," Nessa said. "I need you to know that's not on the table. I didn't fly through that thing to leave you here. You'd leave me here if she says no. I would tie you to the ramp." Corin huffed. "You couldn't lift me. I've seen the printer coffee. You're not strong." And then, after a while quieter, "I keep doing the arithmetic. Old habit. 11 of them and one of me, and I keep trying to make it come out different and it won't. And then Sunday turns up in the middle of it and she's not in the arithmetic. She doesn't fit anywhere in the numbers. She's just extra. A whole extra life that the numbers said couldn't exist. And I think that's the only reason I'm still. I think if it had just been me, alone, the whole 3 weeks, I'd have walked out onto the flat one night and not come back. Lots of the days I wanted to. But you can't. You can't leave when there's something that comes back to check on you." She kept coming back to a torn fence for 22 years, calms. "The least I can do is be worth the walk." Nessa didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that was better than that. She put her back against the warm ribs of the Deathworld's apex predator and watched the stars that looked like the bottom of something, and understood that she had come down here to recover a survivor and was going to leave having been taught, by a 19-year-old and an 11-meter animal, the whole of what it meant to not build the fence. The spring tide came at the second dawn, and it came wide, and it came with 2 landers. Bexley saw them first, because Bexley had not really slept, because Bexley was a pilot, and a pilot near an open eye watches the sky. The seam peeled open to the east, wider than anything they'd seen, a great clear channel through the halo 9 minutes of open black, and down through it came the Ledger's heavy cargo lander, slow and blunt and empty, its ramp already lowering, flying the wide eye with a caution that told Nessa that Bexley's opposite number up top was just as scared as Bexley had been. And behind it, faster, tighter, flying the eye like a hull that had decided the eye was a thing to be dominated rather than asked, came the Sufficiency's containment lander, and it was not empty. "That's a security bird," Bexley said, low, reading it. "Directorate. Those are containment rigs on the hardpoints. That's a net gun, that's a—" his voice changed. "That's a heavy weapon, that's a mounted heavy weapon, Corland. They brought a gun, they brought the gun. They are going to make the fence." Corin was already on his feet. "Everybody stay calm," he said, and it was not a request. It was the most important instruction he had ever given, and he gave it in the flat, certain voice of a person who had learned the exact cost of the alternative. "Whatever happens in the next 10 minutes, whatever they do, whatever they point at her, nobody panics, nobody runs, nobody makes a praise sound, and above everything, above all of it, nobody points a weapon at her, because the second a weapon comes up she reads every one of us as the fence, and then it doesn't matter who meant well." He looked at Sunday, who had risen, who had felt the change in him and come up off the pan to her full towering height for the first time since they'd arrived, and whose one dark eye had gone to the descending landers with an attention that was no longer sleepy at all. "It's okay, girl," Corin said softly, and put his hand on her foreleg, and did not take his eyes off the security bird coming down. "It's okay. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Nobody's building the fence today, not while I'm standing on it." The two landers set down 200 meters apart on the white flat, the Ledger's cargo bird to the south with its empty belly open and its ramp already down, the Sufficiency's containment bird to the north, and out of the northern bird came the fence. It came out as a security element, 8 of them, Directorate troopers in heavy rigs fanning into a practiced arc, and behind them a containment sled with a net-throwing rig folded on its back, and on the sled, tracking, a mounted heavy weapon on a powered mount, and walking out in front of all of it, unhelmeted, immaculate, came Assessor Vol Thren, who had never in his life been cold, and who stopped at the top of the arc and looked across 200 meters of blazing white pan at the largest predator the Conquered had ever confirmed, standing to its full towering height beside a starved human boy, and did the thing that Nessa would remember as the exact moment she understood the whole tragedy of the fence. He looked relieved. He looked across 200 meters at an 11-meter apex, relieved, because he had a gun and 8 troopers and a net and a mandate, and the fence made him feel like the one in charge, exactly as it had made a resupply pilot feel 40 years ago, and Nessa watched relief settle onto the assessor's polished face, and knew that relief was the most dangerous thing on the plane. "Containment element, hold the arc," Thren said, his voice carrying on the open channel that both crews shared. "Survivor, this is Assessor Vol Thren of the Directorate Hull Sufficiency. You are recovered. Walk toward my position away from the organism and my medical team will receive you. The organism will be contained. A beat. Do not run. Movement toward the organism will be read as non-compliance." "Assessor," Corin's voice came back level, and he did not move, and he did not take his hand off Sunday's foreleg. "I'm going to talk and you're going to listen, because I've been on this ground 3 weeks and you've been on it 30 seconds. And the difference between those 2 numbers is the difference between the ones who lived here and the ones who are torn down in the sand 4 kilometers north of you." He didn't raise his voice. He'd learned better than that. "You've got your element in an arc. You've got a gun on a mount, and you feel safe right now because of it. I need you to understand that the feeling is a lie. I need you to understand that you are alive at this exact moment for one reason, and the reason is that she has decided you're mine, and I have decided your guests, and the whole arrangement is being held up by a boy's word and an animal's patience, and your gun is not part of it. Your gun has never been part of it. If your gun were the thing keeping you alive, Assessor, you'd already be finding out how wrong you were. Noncompliance noted, said Thren, who had heard none of it because a man behind a fence hears nothing. Containment element. Ready the net. On my mark we deploy restraint and the survivor will be extracted under cover. Weapon. Track the organism's center mass and stand by to neutralize if restraint fails. The powered mount whined. The heavy weapon came around, slow and settled, and its aim point found the great pale flank of the animal that had kept a boy alive for 3 weeks, at a range no gunner could miss, and Nessa's heart stopped, because this was it, this was the fence. This was the resupply pilot and the note and the torn cable happening again, live in front of her in the same blazing daylight. And Corin Vale stepped in front of the gun. He did it without drama and without hesitation, 3 steps, and put himself between the mounted weapon and the animal, square in the aim point. A starved 19-year-old in a torn survey suit standing in front of an 11-meter apex predator with his arms loose at his sides. And he looked across 200 meters at Assessor Vol Thren, and he said, in a voice that carried flat and clear across all that white, "Then you neutralize me first, because I'm not moving and she's behind me, and your gunner's going to have to put it through the survivor you flew all this way to recover. Log that, Assessor. Log that the Directorate's containment plan for Kier 9 required firing a heavy weapon through the only living human on the planet. Log it and see how it reads at the inquiry." The plane went absolutely still. Even the wind, what little there was, seemed to hold. "Move him," Thren said, and for the first time there was something under the polish, something thin and rising. "Element, move the survivor." "Physically remove." "Belay that." The voice came from the Northern Landers ramp, from the last seat of the last row, from the old Viharn who had bullied his way down on a bird that didn't want him. And Overseer Taran came down the Sufficiency's own ramp folding fast on his 4 legs, faster than anyone that age had any right to, and crossed the pan and put himself, deliberately, into the arc, between the containment element and the boy, so that now there were 2 of them in the aim point. A starved human child and an old Viharn overseer, and the gunner's clean shot was a clean shot no longer. "Overseer Taran," Thren's voice was ice now, "you are relieved of the biological question. You have no authority on this ground. Return to the lander, or I will have you restrained with the organism." "I have the authority of a witness," Taran said, and he was not flat now, the overseer who was always flat. He had let it up out of him at last, and it filled the whole shared channel. "And I'm about to give this element something to witness, and every one of them is going to carry it for the rest of their lives, so I suggest they listen. Assessor Thren, you have deployed a containment element against an organism at a range of 200 meters. You feel that this is control. I want you to do one thing before you give your mark. I want you to ask yourself a question, and I want you to answer it honestly, because your life and the lives of your 8 troopers depend on the answer." He gestured, one long arm back across the flat at the towering pale shape of the animal, standing patient behind the boy, watching all of them out of one dark calm eye. "That animal has been aware of your lander since it broke the halo. It watched you land. It watched your element deploy. It watched your gun come around and find it. It has had, by my count, 90 seconds during which it knew, with whatever an apex knows, that 8 armed strangers had arrived on its ground and pointed a weapon at it in the one posture its whole species has learned across 10,000 years means threat." Taran's voice dropped, and somehow that made it louder. "And in those 90 seconds, Assessor, it has not moved. It has not charged. It has not closed the 200 meters that it could close, I would wager, faster than your gunner could bring the mount to bear. It has stood still, behind a boy, and let you point a gun at it. Now, ask yourself the question, is it standing still because your containment element has it contained? He let it hang. Or is it standing still because the boy asked it to? And the only thing on this entire plane keeping you and your 8 troopers alive is a 19-year-old's word to an animal you are, at this moment, doing your level best to betray at the exact place it was betrayed once before. Nobody moved. The gunner Nessa saw had gone very still behind the weapon. "Warden Ruma," Taran said without turning, "you are the Concord's foremost authority on apex organisms. You have your reaver here off the lead in the animal's presence. Tell the assessor what your reaver is doing. Tell him what it has been doing since we crested the ridge." And Warden Ruma, who had come down to this world certain of the order of things, walked out into the ark to stand with the old Viharn and the starved boy, 3 of them now in the aim point, and she said loud, so every trooper heard it, "My reaver will not look at it. My reaver, the finest killing animal the Concord fields that has never refused ground in its life, has spent 3 days with its face in the dirt, because it read that animal off the ramp and understood, the way only another predator can understand, that it is in the presence of something it must not challenge. My reaver knows what your gunner does not, assessor. My reaver knows that the containment is theater, that we are alive on sufferance, that the boy is the only reason any of us drew breath through the night, and the animal is the only reason the boy drew breath through 3 weeks, and your gun," she turned and looked full at the mounted weapon at the trooper crouched behind it, "your gun is a lie you are telling yourself so you don't have to feel how completely you are not in control. Put it down. Not for the animal's sake, for your 8 troopers' sake. Put it down before it decides that you are the fence." It was the young gunner who broke it. Nessa was watching him, because someone had to watch the gun, and she saw the exact moment the words landed on a frightened directorate trooper who had flown down through a thing called the void to a world that killed everyone, and who was crouched behind a weapon aimed at a mountain, with a boy and an overseer and a warden standing in front of it telling him the weapon was a lie. She saw his hand come off the firing grip. She saw him lean back from the mount, slow, deliberate, both hands rising empty into the blazing light, and she heard him say, on the open channel, in a young voice thin with everything he had just understood, "I'm not firing through the kid. Assessor, sir, I'm not. I'm not going to be the pilot in the note. Somebody read us the note. I'm not going to be the guy in the note." And one by one, down the arc, the other 7 troopers lowered their weapons, not because Thren ordered it. Thren had ordered nothing. Thren was standing in the middle of his own containment plan watching it dissolve, but because a 19-year-old had stepped in front of a gun, and an old man had asked a question, and a hunter had told the truth, and because every one of them, underneath the rig and the mandate and the fence, would rather be alive and unsure than certain and torn down in the sand. Assessor Vol Thren stood alone at the top of a broken arc, and looked across 200 meters of white at the animal that had not moved, and Nessa watched the relief drain out of his polished face, and something much older and much more human take its place, which was the understanding, arriving all at once and far too late to be graceful, that he had never been in charge of anything at all. "Stand down the element," Thren said. His voice had nothing left in it. "Stand down the power off the mount. Fold the net." He looked at Taran. "You've made your point, Overseer." "It was not my point," Taran said, and the flat had come back into him now, the terrible Viharn flatness, and it was a mercy. "It was the boy's. I only stood where he was already standing. Now power off your mount, Assessor, and get your element back behind the line they came from, and let us do the thing we came down here to do, which is the only thing that was ever going to work, and which your gun could only ever have prevented." He turned his back on the directorate, fully, deliberately, a thing a Viharn did not do to a superior, and he walked across the arc to where the boy stood in front of the animal, and he stopped a respectful distance from the great pale shape, and he looked up at the one dark eye, and he inclined his long head slow, the way Warden Ruma had bowed it for the human dead. "Cargo rating Vale," Overseer Taran said quietly. "The fence is down, it will stay down. You have my word, and I have spent 40 years being a man whose word closes files." He gestured gently back toward the ledger's empty cargo bird, its ramp down, its belly open, no cage, no net, no gun. Whenever you're ready, on her terms, in her time, ask her. The wide eye would hold for 8 minutes, and Bexley Hart had already spent 3 of them just getting the containment element clear and the ledger's ramp squared. And now there were 5 minutes to convince an apex predator to leave the only world it had ever known. And Corin Vale walked out across the white flat toward an open ramp with his heart going like a fist on a door and made himself, with everything he had, look like a boy who was not in any hurry at all. Slow, he murmured to himself, to her, to all of it. Slow, girl, we do this slow. There's no such thing as fast that ends well. Sunday came off her ground behind him. Nessa, watching from beside the ramp with her hand pressed flat over her own mouth, saw the great pale animal lower from her towering threat height back down to her walking slab length, and followed the boy, unhurried, one enormous silent step at a time, across the flat toward the lander. And it was the single most impossible thing she had ever watched, and it was happening at a walking pace in bright daylight, and she could not breathe. The Deathworld's apex predator, the thing 40 years of charts marked with a symbol that meant do not, walking across the open pan at a boy's shoulder toward a conquered ship, because he had asked, and because sometime in the last 3 weeks the asking had become a thing she said yes to. And then 40 meters from the ramp, Sunday stopped. She stopped all at once, the way she did everything, and her head came up, and the one dark eye went past the boy to the lander, to the ramp, to the open dark maw of the cargo bay beyond it. And Nessa saw the animal's whole body change, saw the ease go out of it, saw the ancient wariness come up through the pale hide like a tide, and understood with a lurch exactly what the animal was looking at. She was looking at an enclosure. A ramp, a wall, a dark space you walked into and could not easily walk out of. She was looking at the shape of the thing that, the last time she had trusted it, had ended with a gun, and a torn fence, and 40 years of checking a mailbox that never had anything in it. She won't, Warden Ruma said very low at Nessa's shoulder. Look at her, she won't. That is the fence to her, that dark bay is the fence. She came to a boy, but she will not walk into a wall, not after what a wall cost her, and I would not push it, whatever the clock says. Push her into that and you undo everything. You become the wall. Corin had felt her stop. He stopped 2, 3 steps up the ramp and turned and looked back down at her, 40 meters and a whole planet's worth of betrayal between them. And Nessa watched a 19-year-old understand in one glance exactly what Warden Ruma had just said, and set down, visibly, the temptation to hurry, to coax, to make the sound that would push her, and instead do the hardest thing, which was nothing. 4 minutes, Courland, Bexley said in her ear tight. I hate to be the guy. 4 minutes and the eye starts to close and I can't, the heavy bird can't fly a closing eye. We go now or we go tomorrow, and I don't think there's a tomorrow that ends better than right now. Give him the 4 minutes, Nessa said. All of them, don't you dare rush him. Corin walked back down the ramp. He walked back down, away from the ship, out onto the flat, to the animal and the clock be damned. And he stopped in front of her, small under the great pale head, and he reached up and he put both his hands on the side of her jaw the way he had every morning, and he leaned his forehead against the hide there, and Nessa could hear him because his channel was open and he had forgotten it was, or hadn't cared, and what he said was not a command and it was not a coax. It was just the truth, said quiet. To an animal at the edge of a wall. I know, Corin said. I know what it looks like. I know what the last one did to you. I know you've been checking that fence for 22 years and nobody came, and then somebody came and it was a gun. And now here I am asking you to walk into the exact thing that betrayed you. And I know, I'm not going to pretend it's not a wall. It's a wall. I won't lie to you. I have never once lied to you, and I'm not going to start on the last thing I ever ask you. He breathed. But here's the deal. Here's the whole deal, and it's the only one I've got. I'm going up that ramp. And I'm going into that wall. And if you come, then wherever that wall goes, I'm in it with you the whole way, and I will not leave. I will not let anybody build a fence between us. I will sleep against your side every cold night for the rest of your life the way I have every night since you came, and you will never, ever check an empty mailbox again. And if you don't come," his voice broke and he let it, forehead against her jaw, "then I'm staying. I already told them. I'm not going up a ramp and leaving you at the bottom watching me go. I've done my leaving. So it's both of us or it's neither of us, and either way you're not getting betrayed again, not by me, not ever, and that's not a leash and it's not a fence, that's just the truth about how it is with us now." "Okay." He stepped back and took his hands off her jaw and held them open at his sides, and turned and walked slow back toward the ramp, and did not look over his shoulder, because looking over your shoulder is a prey thing, and he had never once been prey to her. He walked up the ramp. He walked into the dark of the bay. He turned around inside the wall in the shadow, and he stood there in the exact place, and he waited, and he did not call her, and he did not hold out his hand, and he did not make one single sound, because the only thing left to offer her was the choice, clean, with nothing on it. 2 minutes, Bexley whispered. Sunday looked at the boy, standing in the dark of the wall. And then the Deathworld's apex predator, the thing that had kept 140 ghosts and one living boy, the thing that had checked a torn fence for 22 years waiting for someone to come back and be kind and not lie, walked across the last 40 meters of her own world, and set one enormous forefoot on the ramp of a conquered ship, and stopped, and stood, half in the light and half in the dark, at the threshold of the wall, and Nessa saw the whole animal shudder, once. A long ripple down the pale hide, the physical cost of walking toward the shape of the thing that had hurt her. And then she put her weight forward, and climbed the ramp, slow, and walked into the wall, and lay down in the dark of the cargo bay beside the boy, and put her great head down, and turned it so that her throat was toward him, the way it had been in the very first photograph, the posture of a thing that has decided about you, and was, for the second time in 40 years and the second time in her life, comfortable. Corin sat down against her side in the dark of the bay, and put one hand flat on her jaw, and looked out through the closing gap of the ramp at Nessa and Ruma, and the old overseer and the dead white plane beyond them. And he did not say anything, because there wasn't anything, and his face was doing all of it at once. "Close it up, Bexley," Nessa said, and her voice was not steady now and she did not care. "Everybody aboard, close it up and fly the eye. We're going home, all of us, every last one of us that's left." The ramp came up. The eye was closing. Bexley's heart flew the spring tide the way he'd flown the first one, both hands and his whole attention, and no words to spare. And this time the heavy cargo bird climbed slow and blunt into the narrowing seam of clear black with 11 meters of apex predator and a sleeping boy in her belly, and behind her the Sufficiency's containment bird, and behind that nothing. Because there was nothing left down there worth coming back for except the wreck of a survey tender and a torn-down fence and 11 graves in ground like concrete, and the beacon, which Nessa checked later from orbit, because she had to know, had finally, for the first time in 40 years, gone quiet. It had stopped pinging the moment the animal left the planet. Nobody had a good explanation for that. The engineers said the contact plate must have finally failed, 40 years of dust, a coincidence of timing. Nessa let them say it. She knew what she thought and she was never going to be able to prove it, and she didn't need to. She thought the beacon had been on for one reason for 22 years, and the reason had just flown up through the eye asleep against a boy, and there was no longer anyone at the fence, because for the first time since the gun, the thing that came to the fence was not waiting anymore. It had been asked, and it had said yes, and it had gone home, not to the station, not to the mailbox, but to wherever the boy was, because that, in the end, was the only home it had ever actually been checking for. They did not put her in a cage on the ledger, because there was no cage, and because the boy had made them all swear it, and because after the surface not one member of either crew wanted to be the person who built the fence. What they did instead was give her the aft cargo hold, The big one, emptied out, its blast door propped and lashed open so it could never be closed on her. And they ran the heat up in it until it matched the day side of Kier 9, and they put down a bed of the packing matter from the recovery crates, and Corin Vale moved into it with her. And that was the arrangement. And the Ledger flew home to the way station at Coron Deep, with an apex predator loose in her aft hold, and a 19-year-old asleep against its flank. And the strangest thing about the whole voyage, the thing the crew talked about for years after, was how quickly it became ordinary. Because it did. That was the part nobody could have predicted from the outside, the part the Directorate's eventual report could not find language for. You cannot hold a crew at a pitch of terror for 11 days. On the first day they gave the aft hold a wide berth and spoke of the animal in the hushed tones you use for a bomb. By the third day the galley had started sending down 2 meal trays instead of 1, because the boy would not leave her, and somebody had decided the boy still had to eat. By the 5th day, Warden Ruma had taken to sitting in the open doorway of the hold for an hour each watch, not going in, just sitting, with Osk beside her. And the animal called Sunday would open one dark eye, and regard the warden and the reaver for a while and then close it again. And Ruma said she was learning more about apex behavior in those quiet hours than in 30 years of the hunt, and that most of what she was learning was that she had been wrong about the word apex, which she had always understood to mean the thing at the top, the thing that took, and which she now suspected meant something closer to the thing with nothing left to prove. Nessa came down to the hold on the 6th day with the file. She found Corin awake, sitting against the animal's side in the red heat, thinner than he should still be but with something behind his eyes that had not been there on the surface, some of the 3 weeks starting slowly to let go of him. Sunday's great head was down, and one dark eye tracked Nessa across the hold and then, deciding about her as it had decided days ago, closed. "The overseer wanted you to see it before it goes up the chain," Nessa said, and crouched and turned the slate to him. "The file, the Kier 9 file, 40 years old, he's rewriting the closure." Corin read it. It took him a while. It was not written the way files were written. Overseer Taran had abandoned the cast tongue of the recovery service somewhere in it and written the rest in plain words, and it named the 11 dead of the Marigold by name, all of them. Halloran and Otts and Biscay and Duna and Wit and Sorrel and Petra and Coyle and Wren and Ili and Marn. And beside them it entered the finding that they had died of the environment and of the crash and of the cold, which was true, and which took nothing from them. And then it named the 140 of the expeditions before, the ones the Conquered had logged for 40 years as lost to a Category 1 hazard. And beside them it entered a different finding, and Nessa watched the boy read the different finding, and watched his jaw work. "He's saying it was the fence," Corin said. "Officially, he's putting it in the permanent file that they died of the fence." "He's saying," Nessa said, "that the closure event for the consortium expedition was not the environment, that the environment of Kier 9 is survivable, that there is standing proof, a recovered survivor, that a human being can live 3 weeks on the surface without loss provided he does not make an enemy of the apex organism, and that the 140 died because the mission, quote, elected to treat a tolerant apex organism as a containment subject, constructed a barrier, and discharged a weapon across that barrier, thereby converting the single survivable feature of the environment into a lethal one." End quote. She looked at him. "He's saying they killed themselves with the fence, Corin, and he's saying the Directorate mandate, contain on contact or neutralize, is the fence, written down, 40 years standing, and that it has to come down, or the next expedition to any death world with a tolerant apex is going to make the same grave the same way." She paused. "Thren signed it." Thren signed it as corroborating witness. I didn't think he would. I don't think Taran thought he would." Nessa turned the slate back. "But he was on the surface at the end, standing at the top of his broken arc watching his whole plan dissolve, and I think a man can spend his whole life behind a fence, and then have it taken down around him in one afternoon and go one of two ways after. He went the other way. He wrote an addendum. You should read it sometime. It's the closest thing to an apology I've ever seen come out of the directorate, and it's addressed to a resupply pilot who's been dead 40 years, and it says, essentially, I understand now why you shouldn't have fired. I understand now what you were standing behind. She was quiet a moment. People surprise you. That's the part I keep having to relearn. The overseer who closes files early tore one open with his hands. The assessor who came to build the fence signed the paper that takes it down. And a cargo rating who did the arithmetic every night and kept getting 0, she nudged him gently, turned out to be the reason the whole sector has to rewrite what a death world is. The story got out, of course. Stories like that always get out. It went up the chain with the file, and then it went sideways off the file the way the good ones do. And by the time the ledger made Coron deep, it had arrived ahead of her, and it had changed in the telling the way stories change. And the version that ran through the way station and then through the sector, and then, eventually, everywhere, was not quite Nessa's version and not quite Taron's. But it kept the one thing that mattered, the one image that had started all of it, because that image was the thing nobody could argue with. Which had been the entire point. They had thought the void killed all 12. That was how it started, everywhere it was told. 12 humans went into the deadliest place the Conquered had ever charted, chasing a beacon that shouldn't have still been on, and the void closed over them the way it had closed over 140 before, and the Conquered posted the loss and prepared to post the warning, because that was what the void did. That was the whole and only thing the void had ever done for 40 years without exception. It killed everyone, and it sent nothing back. And then a boy sent back a photograph of himself taking a nap. That was the part that went everywhere. Not the file, not the fence, not the inquiry that eventually struck the containment mandate from the Death World protocols and replaced it with a single dry line that Warden Ruma was said to have drafted, and that read, in its entirety, an apex organism that has not attacked is not attacking. Do not be the one who changes that. Not any of the sober parts. What went everywhere was the image, the blazing white ground, the impossible pale slab of the animal, the one dark calm eye aimed up the dead transmission, and the boy, filthy and starved and defenseless and completely asleep, curled into the killing curve of the deadliest thing on the deadliest world in the sector, as safe as a child on a hearthrug. Humanity, the sector decided, had not sent soldiers to conquer the void. Humanity had sent 12 ordinary people to answer a 40-year-old cry for help, and the void had killed 11 of them the way it killed everyone. And then it had looked at the 12th, too tired to run, and it had done the one thing it had never done in 40 years, the thing no weapon and no expedition and no containment mandate had ever once been able to make it do. It had kept him warm, and when he left it had followed him home. Nessa heard a Conquered officer at the way station try to explain it to a junior, heard him reach for the frame the Conquered always reached for, the frame of threat and force and the biggest gun, and heard him fail, and heard him land, finally, on the only frame that fit, which was the one the boy had handed them at 4:17 on the 19th day. You don't understand what it means, the officer said, that they're like that. Everyone keeps asking how dangerous the animal is. That's the wrong question. Of course it's dangerous. It's the most dangerous thing we've ever seen. It emptied a plane of scavengers by lifting its head. That's not the frightening part. The frightening part is that it's asleep in the photograph. The frightening part is that the deadliest thing on the deadliest world in the sector looked at one of theirs, cold, starving, finished, no weapon, no threat, nothing, and decided to keep it warm. You want to know what humanity is? Humanity is the species whose worst day, whose most broken and defeated single survivor, at the absolute bottom of his luck on the worst ground in the galaxy, is still somehow the thing that a death world's apex predator looks at and decides it would rather protect than eat. We spent 40 years afraid of that planet. We never once thought to be afraid of the people it lets in. Bexley Hart went down to the aft hold on the 9th day, alone, off his own watch, and stood in the propped-open doorway for a long while before he made himself step across the line of it. He had flown the eye twice. He had done the impossible thing twice, down and up, and both times he had done it by naming what was true and refusing to be the man who got the window wrong, and both times he had walked off the flight deck steady and gone somewhere private and shaken like a wet dog. He had not been able to stop thinking about the second flight, the spring tide, the closing seam, the 11 meters of apex predator in his belly, and he had decided, in the way young men decide things, that he could not carry it clean until he had stood in front of the animal on the ground with nothing between them on purpose, and found out whether he could. "You can come in," Corin said from the red dark. "She knows you flew her home, whatever that is to her it's not nothing." A pause, slow though and no. "No sounds prey makes," Bexley said. "Yeah. I've got the rules by heart." He came in slow, hands visible, into the dayside heat, and he crossed the hold to where the boy sat against the great pale flank, and he lowered himself down a careful distance away, and the animal's one dark eye opened and found him and weighed him and deciding, closed, and Bexley let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding since the first descent. "I keep flying it," he said. "In my head, both eyes, the closing one especially. I get to the part where the seam narrows and he shook his head. "I don't know how you did 3 weeks of this. I did 4 minutes of it twice and it's living in me rent-free and it won't leave. 4 minutes. "You did 4 minutes twice so I wouldn't have to do a 4th week," Corin said simply. "That's how I did 3 weeks. Somebody was always doing a hard thing so somebody else didn't have to. Halloran flew us in dead sticks so 5 of us walked away. Wren kept me together till his suit went. She kept me warm." He put his hand flat on the hide behind him. "And you flew the void twice with a monster in your hold because a stranger scratched Hurry in the dirt. You're already in it, Bexley. The thing where people do the hard part for each other. You've been in it since 417. It lives in you rent-free because that's the rent. There's no version where you fly the eye twice and walk away light. Light's not one of the options. Steady is. You were steady. I was watching. You were the steadiest man on the surface of that planet, and you didn't even know it." Bexley Hart sat in the red heat a body length from the deadliest animal the conquered had ever confirmed, and found that his hands had gone still for the first time in 9 days, and understood that the boy had just done to him the thing the boy did to everything, arranged him, gently, into a shape he could live in, and he stayed there until his watch, and he flew the rest of the way home light after all. Coron Deep was a way station the size of a small moon, and it had never in its long, busy life held its breath the way it held it when the ledger came in with the aft hold lashed open. They had planned for panic and gotten silence. Word had run ahead, and so the great docking gallery, which was never empty, which had not been empty in the 40 years of its operation, was empty, cleared by a station master who had decided that whatever was in that hold did not need an audience, and the ledger came into her berth through a gallery lined only with the few who had a reason to be there, and every one of them stood very still and watched the aft hold and did not make a sound. Because the story had traveled with one instruction attached to it, and the instruction was do not make the sounds prey makes, and the whole of Coron Deep, 100,000 souls, had quietly agreed to obey a 19-year-old they had never met. They held the memorial for the 11 in the gallery, because there was no other room that would do, and because Corin would not leave the ship and the animal would not leave the boy, so the memorial came to them. It was a conquered service and a human service braided together, and it was brief, because Corin had asked for brief, and at the center of it Overseer Taran stood before the assembled and read the 11 names, all of them, in a voice that did not rise, and after each name he was silent for the length of a breath, and Nessa stood beside the open hold with the boy and the animal, and listened to an old Viharn overseer honor 11 humans he had never met on a world he had tried to write off, and understood that this, too, was a kind of fence coming down. Halloran Ots Bisked Duna, Wit sorrel petricoil ren ilai marn. Corin said them along with him under his breath, the way he had said them on the surface, the way Nessa suspected he would say them every day of his life, and at the end of it he put his hand flat on Sunday's jaw in the dark of the hold in front of 100 watching strangers, and he did not cry, and Nessa thought that the not crying was the memorial, the real one, the one no service could hold a boy who had done all his leaving, standing his ground beside the one he had not left. The question of where they would go took 9 days to answer, and in the end it answered itself. Because the conquered, faced with a problem it had no protocol for, did the thing large institutions almost never do, which was ask the person who understood it best. They asked Corin. He did not want a station. A station was a wall. He did not want a research posting. A research posting was a fence with better funding. He did not want to go back to Kier 9, which surprised the assessors and did not surprise Nessa, because Kier 9 was where the 11 were, and Kier 9 was the world that had frozen the boys' people one by one, and whatever it had also been, it was not a home. It had only ever been the place where the animal had waited at a fence for someone kind. What Corin wanted, when they finally thought to ask, was simple and enormous and exactly like him. Somewhere warm, he said, somewhere that doesn't try to kill you at night. Somewhere empty so nobody builds anything she has to be afraid of and so nobody gets it in their head to come point a gun at her because they read a chart. Room, sun, nothing that needs a fence, that's the whole list. He'd thought about it clearly in the long red hours of the hold. And a relay. One relay, a good one that reaches Corin deep, so I can send a picture now and then, to let people know we're all right. He'd looked at Nessa when he said it, and she'd understood that the picture was going to be a habit now, a thing between them, the boys' chosen language, the one thing nobody could argue with. They found him the world in a month. It was a frontier survey grant, catalogued and passed over, a warm, bright, empty place of grass plains and slow rivers under a kind yellow sun, no colony, no neighbors, no reason for anyone to come, and the conquered granted it, the whole world, to a 19-year-old cargo rating and the apex predator of a death world, with a speed that told you the conquered was as relieved to have an answer as the boy was to have a home. Warden Ruma flew them out. She would not have let anyone else do it. Osk rode in the hold with them the whole way, off the lead, and on the last day of the flight the Reaver got up slow and crossed the hold, and lay down a respectful distance from the great pale animal, and put its head on its paws, and Ruma watched her killing beast choose freely to spend its last hours near the thing it had deferred to. And she said, quietly to Nessa, that she thought she might resign the Hunt Corps when this was done. That she did not think she could go back to teaching animals to close throats after watching one choose, on its own, to lie down near the thing with nothing left to prove. Overseer Terran did not fly out. He was too old and there were files. There were always files, and he had a new one now, the biggest of his career, the one where a 40-year mandate got struck, and a death world got recatalogued not as a graveyard, but as a world that would keep you alive if you had the humility not to reach for your weapons. But he came to the berth before they left, and he stood in the open door of the hold, at a respectful distance, the way Ruma had taught them all to stand, and he looked at the animal, and then at the boy, and he said the thing that Nessa would carry longest of all the things that were said in that whole strange season. I have closed 19 files, Overseer Terran said, and every one of them at the end I was certain of. That was my whole method, certainty early before the cost. And I want you to know, Cargo Rating Vale, that you have cost me my certainty permanently, and I am grateful. Because I was certain, at 4:17 on the 19th day, that I was about to close the 20th file the way I had closed the others, on a number the evidence supported, and the number was 0, and I was wrong. And the reason I was wrong is that a boy who had lost everyone he came with refused to accept the arithmetic, and built a compressor out of a broken suit, and sent me a photograph of himself asleep to tell me. Not to argue, not to beg, just to tell me plainly. In the one language I could not close early, that certainty is the fence. That the moment you are certain a thing is dead or dangerous or lost or beyond keeping, you have built the wall, and everything after that you do to the wall and not to the living thing. He inclined his long head. You will send your pictures to Corland, I think. That is right. But send one once to me. An old Viharn who closed his files early. Send me one picture some day of the two of you somewhere warm. So the last thing in my longest file is not a number but a nap. They lifted for the warm world the next day. Nessa Corland stayed on the comms. She could have taken a posting off it after the Kier 9 file closed. She was offered several, all of them steps up, all of them the kind of thing a young signals tech who had flown the void and lived should have wanted. She turned them down and asked instead to be reassigned to the relay watch at Coron Deep, the long-range board, the one that reached out past the frontier to a warm, empty world with a single relay on it. And her new overseer thought she was mad and signed the transfer anyway, because there is no arguing with a person who has decided where she needs to be. She told herself it was so someone competent would be watching, in case anything went wrong out there, in case a boy alone on a whole world with an apex predator ever needed to punch a burst through to somebody who would understand it. That was the official reason, and it was even partly true. The truer reason she only admitted to herself on the quiet watches, which was that she had learned, on 19 days of a graveyard board and one long descent into the void, to hate the shape of a nothing where a someone should be, and she was not going to spend the rest of her career listening to a silence she could have kept from happening. So she watched the board that reached the warm world, and she waited for the pictures, and the pictures came. The first one came 3 weeks after they made landfall, and it stopped her heart for a different reason than the first one ever had. It was green. That was the whole of it at first glance, and after so long staring at the blazing white of Kier 9, the green went into her like water. A slope of grass under a soft yellow sun, a slow river at the bottom of it catching the light, and on the slope the great pale slab of the animal, lying in the grass the way she had lain in the salt scrape on her side in the sun, and the grass had come up around her so that she looked impossibly like a pale hill someone had grown a meadow over, and against her flank in the exact curve where the foreleg met the body, the boy, asleep, one arm flung across the animal's foreleg, cheek down on the hide, mouth a little open. It was the same photograph. It was exactly, deliberately the same photograph. He had set it up the same way, the same composition, the same pose. She could see the slate propped on a rock and the timer's tell in the framing, and it was the complete opposite of the first one. And Nessa understood that this was the point, that the boy who spoke in the one language nobody could argue with had just sent her a sentence, and the sentence was, "Look, same nap, different world, we made it." He was not thin anymore. That was the thing she looked at longest. The 3 weeks of the void had gone out of him. He had filled back into himself, a healthy young man asleep in a meadow with his impossible dog, and there was a small structure at the top of the slope now, a shelter he'd built, low and open, nothing with a door that could close, nothing with a wall a thing would have to be afraid of, and there was a garden beside it, rows of something green and human coming up out of alien soil, and the whole photograph said, without a single word, in the language of a boy who had learned that pictures cannot be argued with, "I am not surviving anymore. I am living, come see." She did go see, eventually, twice a year when the relay schedule allowed, on the supply run that the Concord kept up because it had quietly decided that the boy on the warm world was worth a supply run, and each visit the world was more itself, and the boy was more himself, and the animal was the same. The animal did not change. The animal lay in the sun and lifted her great head when the supply skiff came down, and regarded it out of one dark calm eye, and then, deciding about it as she decided about everything, went back to sleep. Nessa learned to walk up the slope slow, hands visible, no sounds prey makes, the way she'd learned on the flat, and Sunday tolerated her the way she tolerated the supply skiff, as a thing that belonged to the boy and was therefore, provisionally, permitted. And on the second visit, Nessa sat in the grass, a body length from the apex predator of a dead world, and drank printer coffee that Corin had improved with something he grew, and neither of them said very much. And it was one of the best afternoons of her life. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked him once on that slope, meaning the ship, the crew, the sector people, and he knew what she meant and he thought about it honestly, the way he thought about everything. "I miss people sometimes," Corin said. "I miss you. I miss the galley on the ledger, which is a stupid thing to miss. The coffee was terrible. I miss having somebody to say the names to." He was quiet. "I say them every day. The 11, out loud to her in the morning. She doesn't know what they are, but she listens, or she does the thing that looks like listening, and it means I never say them to nobody. That matters more than I can explain. The worst part on the surface wasn't the cold and it wasn't the dying. It was that I was going to be the only one who remembered them, and if I went too, they'd be gone. And now I'm not the only one. She remembers them with me. However much an animal can remember a name it can't understand, she does every morning because I do." He looked down the slope at the river. "So no. I don't think I could leave. I've got a whole planet and a garden and the one being in the galaxy that would rather keep me warm than eat me, and I get to say 11 names every morning to something that stays to hear them. That's not surviving. You keep looking at me like I'm surviving. I'm not. This is the most anyone's ever had. The last picture, the last one that matters to this telling, though there were many after, a whole life of them. Corin sent not to Nessa but to an old Viharn overseer at Coron Deep, because a debt is a debt and the boy paid his. Overseer Taran was very old by then, and he had closed his last file, the 20th and largest, the one that rewrote a death world, and he had spent the closing years of a long procedural life being quietly astonished, over and over, by how much better the world became every time someone declined to build a fence. He was at his board on an ordinary watch when the relay chimed and the payload resolved, and it was, of course, a picture, because the boy only ever sent one thing, the one thing that could not be argued with. It was the warm world, the green slope, the soft yellow sun, the slow river, the great pale animal lying in the deep grass on her side in the light. And curled into the killing curve of her, safe as a child on a hearth rug, fast asleep with one arm flung across her foreleg and his mouth a little open, the boy. Older now, filled out and weathered in content, asleep on the apex predator of a dead world on a living one in the sun. There were 4 characters folded into the payload where a signature block would go. Not a hull number this time. Just 4 letters, scratched in the dirt on the slate's housing and turned to the lens, the way the boy always turned his messages to the lens, plain and clumsy and unmistakable, so the old overseer would understand exactly what he was looking at, and why it had been sent to him, and what it meant. The word was home. Overseer Taran looked at the picture for a long time. Then he did a thing he had never once done in 40 years and 19 closed files, a thing the recovery service had no procedure for and no column to log. He printed it. He printed the photograph on real stock, and he took it down off the board, and he carried it to the permanent file of Kier 9, the file that had started with a number and the number had been 0, and he opened the file to its final page, and he fixed the photograph there, at the end of it, under the 11 names and the finding about the fence. A boy asleep in the sun on the thing the whole sector had spent 40 years being afraid of, with the word home scratched under it in the dirt. They had thought the void had killed all 12. It had killed 11. That was true, and it was written, and the 11 had their names and their finding and would keep them as long as the conquered kept files. But the 12th it had not killed. The 12th it had looked at, cold and starving and finished, and it had done the one thing 40 years of charts had never recorded it doing, the thing no weapon could compel and no fence could contain and no expedition had ever once earned. It had kept him. It had kept him warm through the killing nights, and it had let him sleep against its side, and when he left it had risen off its own dead world and walked, shuddering into the shape of the very thing that had betrayed it, because he asked, and because he had never lied to it, and because a boy too tired to run had turned out to be the only kind of person a Deathworld's apex predator had ever been waiting for. And now, in a warm meadow under a kind sun, at the end of the longest file the Overseer had ever kept, the two of them were asleep in the grass, and nothing on the whole green world had a wall it needed to fear, and the last entry in the record of the deadliest place the Conquered had ever charted was not a warning and not a number and not a name of the dead. It was a nap. Overseer Taran closed the file gently for the last time and left the light on the board burning, so that the relay to the warm world would always find someone awake, and when to send word to a young comms tech on the long watch that another picture had come, and that the boy was home, and that she should come and see.